At Christmas, my cousin mocked my little hobby. Years later, he tried to copy my $28 million company. I sued him. He turned pale and left. If you ever get to meet my cousin Derek, you'll probably love him. You'll believe you do until he speaks. He's the type of man that goes into a room like he owns it, drops names like loose change, and always finds himself in the spotlight, even if no one invited him. Growing up, he was that child. The one who had the latest iPhone before the rest of us knew there was a new model on the way. The one who was never grounded because he had potential. My faults were due to bad judgment, but his were due to youthful ambition. Yeah, that type of relative. My name is Evan, I'm 34 now. But it all started when I was about 8 years old, sitting at the children's Christmas table on Christmas Eve, listening to Derek talk about his new go-kart, which his father had bought him just because I recall how the mulled cranberry glaze on my dish looked like blood when I stabbed it too hard with my plastic fork. I despised how everyone chuckled as he rattled off everything he'd received that month as if it were some kind of royal decree, but I didn't say anything. Not then. Derek was my mother's older sister's sole child, so in our extended family, he was almost the crown prince. Aunt Evelyn was one of those suburban matriarchs who dressed as if every event were a charity gala and spoke with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone used to having people hang on her every word. She married Uncle Martin, a lawyer with a slickness that would make a snake uncomfortable. They combined to create Derek, the golden child. Meanwhile, my mother raised me alone since my father died before I was born. We did not have much. Hand-me-downs, library books and second-hand aspirations were basically our currency. But we had grit. And we had one another. Even so, every Christmas family gathering served as a reminder that we were barely tolerated, like guests who overstayed their welcome. Aunt Evelyn would constantly forget to notify us about the Christmas clothing theme. Uncle Martin made a few comments about how difficult it must be to live on a single income. Derek mastered the art of the backhanded praise by middle school. "Oh, cool shoes, Evan, are they vintage?" By high school, the distance between us had grown to be more than simply financial. It was everything. He captained the debate squad. When he reached 17, his parents got him a beautiful new BMW. By his sophomore year, he already had a college admissions coach. Meanwhile, I was flipping burgers after school to raise money for a rusted 2003 Corolla I discovered in a neighbor's yard. I didn't loathe him completely. It was more complex than that. I despised what he represented, what he was handed, and what I had to fight tooth and nail for. Christmas Eve became a time of perseverance. My mother would prepare holiday-baked casseroles and her famous Christmas pecan spice pie, dress up in her best Target sweater, and smile through the passive-aggressive comments I used to ask her why we kept going, and she'd just respond, because family is family, and sometimes turning up is the best retribution. I didn't comprehend that at the time. I do now. However, on this particular Christmas Eve last year, everything changed. But first, let me explain how I spent the last decade. While Derek attended an Ivy League institution, amassed LinkedIn connections like Pokemon cards, and began consulting for his father's acquaintances, I kept my head down. I did not share much on social media. I didn't attend reunions. I didn't tell anyone other than my mother what I was working on. From the outside, I appeared to be a quiet relative who most likely worked in information technology. Nobody asked. Nobody cared. Behind the scenes, I had been working very hard. I taught myself coding in college since I couldn't afford additional classes. I freelanced as if my life depended on it. I created contacts, launched products, failed, relaunched, failed again, and continued on. At 26, I founded my own software firm, raised initial capital by pitching at open mic evenings, and survived on ramen and grit. And after years of almost continual rejection and barely sleeping, I finally got a break. Then another and another. It snowballed. By the time I was 31, I had 4 teams spread over 3 continents, a CTO I trusted like a brother, and a valuation of roughly $28 million. But I still didn't say anything to the family. It was not about hiding. It was about peace. Except that peace was never an option with Derek involved. This year's Christmas dinner was at Aunt Evelyn's McMansion, as usual. Derek had the same granite countertops, meticulously cleaned silverware, and arrogant smirk as he leaned against the kitchen island, whirling a pricey Pinot like he was the host of some reality show about unpleasant relatives. "Oh, hey Evan," he remarked as I stepped in, as if I had strolled in from the street. "Are you still living in the city? Doing that tiny technical thing?" I smiled. "Yeah, still doing it, huh? Good on you, man. Persistence is crucial. Even if the pay isn't great, you're your own boss, right?" I nodded, he smirked. We exchanged small chat. Well, he spoke. I listened to him talk about his new Audi, his Christmas vacation in the mountains, and the girl he was dating who modeled part-time, but not in the cheap Instagram way. I didn't say much and let him ramble. He always liked the sound of his own voice. He would occasionally make comments that landed like mosquito bites. Annoying, simple to disregard, but stacking up quickly. Aunt Evelyn summoned everyone to the table. The seating was, as usual, oddly purposeful. Derek sits at the head of the table, with Aunt Evelyn on his right. My mother and I sat off to the side like ornamental guests. We passed the dishes, said Grace, and engaged in polite conversation. And just as I was going for the stuffing, Derek delivered his first genuine jab. So, Evan, he remarked loudly enough to make the cousins down the table interrupt their talk. Have you ever thought about doing something more stable? You know, a real job? With benefits? There was a beat of silence. My mom's fork hovered in midair. I'm doing fine, I said carefully. I mean absolutely, but you're what, 30-something? He shrugged with an apologetic smile. No offense, but at some point the whole startup dream thing becomes a little... just looking out for you, man. Aunt Evelyn chuckled. Evan has always been such a dreamer. But it's important to have passion, even if it doesn't always work out. The mulled cranberry glaze on my plate looked like blood again. I smiled. Just barely. Thanks for the concern, but I'm not too worried. Uncle Martin joined in. Are you still living in the old flat that your mother helped you with a few years ago? She didn't help, I remarked, harsher than I intended. I paid for it myself. He raised his eyebrows, but Derek intervened before the tension could be resolved. Do you know what you should do? He remarked, his eyes gleaming with feigned enthusiasm. Take some business classes. Get a mentor. I could introduce you to some of my schoolmates. They're usually seeking for assistants and younger devs. Thanks, I replied, but I'm good. That's when he really laughed. Come on, man, be real. There is no shame in asking for assistance. We are family. Something within me flickered. Not anger. Not yet, but a sense of awareness, and a countdown has begun in the back of my mind. He kept talking about his six-figure bonus, his investment portfolio, and the Christmas ski lodge he was looking into for the second quarter. He dropped words like assets under management and diversified holdings as if they were preparing for a Christmas roast turkey. Throughout it happened, my mother remained quiet. She kept eating and smiling. I understood what she was thinking. I knew she wanted me to let it go. But something about that night, maybe the booze, maybe the years of keeping my mouth shut, maybe just Derek's arrogance, made me pause because I had a secret, one thing I hadn't told any of them. One that, like a grenade, would devastate that nicely planned Christmas feast. I grinned as I looked across the table at Derek, who was still babbling and looking smug. I was done being quiet, but I hadn't spoken anything yet. Not quite yet. First, I needed to ensure that they were truly listening, and the opportunity arose sooner than I anticipated. Derek had a knack for turning a typical discussion into a performance. Every statement was a setup, every detail a modest boast, and every compliment a subtle barb. After years of hearing that, you'd think I'd become numb. But that night, something felt different. It wasn't just the way he stared at me. Like if I were still that thin youngster eating from the chipped dish at the card table. Everyone else looked at him with admiration and indulgence, as if he were a beloved pet doing another trick. He was halfway through a story about a yacht party in Miami, the kind where you don't post pictures if you know what I mean, when Aunt Evelyn cut in. Derek, honey, have you told them about the Mercedes yet? He smirked, wiped his mouth with his napkin like some deranged royalty, and sat back in his chair. Oh, okay. Yeah, I received the AMG last month. It hasn't even hit the US market yet. One of my clients pulled some strings. Someone at the table whistled. My uncle chuckled. That's my boy, he added, raising his glass. Meanwhile, my mother sat across from me, carving the Christmas roast turkey into small, even pieces so that her hands wouldn't shake. She despised these chats, especially when they devolved into a parade of everything Derek possessed that I purportedly lacked. Not that she said anything. She never did. It was her way. Endure with grace. But this was not grace. This was something else. This was humiliation wrapped in linen napkins, served with sweet potatoes and cocky smiles. So how about you, Evan? Derek inquired, turning back to me with theatrical curiosity. Are you still doing coding stuff? I sipped some water. I'm still running my company, yeah. Oh right. He tilted his head. Freelance or product-based? SAS and API integrations. Scalable platforms? He blinked. Huh? He then looked around the table as if I had just chanted a spell in Latin. Man, you always were the technical one. Aunt Evelyn laughed politely, as if I had made a joke. Then something unexpected happened, like a smack. Actually, she remarked, turning to my mother in the tone of someone ordering wallpaper samples. Evelyn Porter. You remember her, correct? Her son currently works for Amazon full-time stock options. You must be very proud, Evan. My mother looked up, puzzled. She gave a tight-lipped smile. That is nice. But Evan is doing fine on his own. Aunt Evelyn waved her hand. Oh, of course. It's just good to see young people finding something safe these days. I clenched my jaw. Secure. That word, again. As if I were a ticking time bomb of squandered opportunities and terrible choices. Like I had no idea what I was doing with my life. It was as if everything I'd developed was a side project that I'd abandon once I reached adulthood. Derek took the cue. Actually, Mom, speaking of stability, I've been meaning to ask you something, Evan. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice lowering to a phony sincerity. Have you ever thought about selling? I know some investors who are looking for little businesses like yours. You could make 6 figures, maybe low 7s if you play your cards well. My mother stared at me, concern on her face. I took a deep breath. We passed 22 million in ARR last quarter. Silence. It was the kind of silence that lands hard and elicits a dozen bewildered looks. Even the clink of cutlery ceased. Derek blinked. Sorry, what? I looked him dead in the eyes. Annual recurrent income exceeds 22 million. We closed our Series B round 7 months ago. Uncle Martin's laugh was short and harsh. You're joking. I shake my head. Nope. We're currently valued at slightly around 28 million. We intend to buy out within the next 20 months. Another beat of stillness. Aunt Evelyn appeared to have been slapped with a frigid Christmas turkey leg. Derek's mouth opened and then closed. My mother glanced at me with wide eyes. You never told me that. I shrugged. Didn't think anyone wanted to hear about my little tech thing. Derek scoffed. Come on, man. That is not how valuations work. You'd need, what? Teams, offices, legal and accounting. We have all of that, I explained gently. We outsourced the first few years and then created ourselves. There are 4 offices today. Amsterdam, Austin, Singapore, and a distant hub, 52 full-time employees and 41 contractors. He leaned back, his smirk twitching as if it wanted to collapse into something less desirable. So you're saying you have 28 million? I am claiming the corporation is. I pay myself modestly. The majority of it is in equity. Aunt Evelyn, bless her cold heart, recovered first. Well, she remarked, reaching for the wine. Ain't that something? But the atmosphere had changed. You could feel it. Like if someone had turned off the electricity, and all the glossy facades were dimming. Except for Derek, no one really knew what to say. He rose up, walked around the table and clapped my back as if we were fraternity brothers. Well damn, cousin, he exclaimed loudly. I suppose I underestimated you. I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. Guess so. That should have been the end of it. A fresh start, a new dynamic, perhaps even a little respect. But Derek was not designed for that. Neither was Aunt Evelyn. The mood at supper did not improve. Dessert was unusually quiet. Derek wanted to return to familiar grounds. Have you ever met Elon? You should speak with him. Yet his voice was fragile, like someone attempting to keep their footing on a fractured sheet of ice. Aunt Evelyn, on the other hand, made a point of noting Derek's new condo's heated marble floors and authentic Versace tile in the bathroom, which felt like the verbal equivalent of tossing a glitter bomb and asking for everyone to be impressed. We were not. As people began to leave, my mother and I helped clean the dishes. She didn't say anything, simply a slight nod that conveyed more than words. But then, as I was bringing in the last tray from the dining room, I heard something. Who would hide something like that from their family? Aunt Evelyn's voice was shrill, muttering through clenched teeth. It's false and manipulative. Derek murmured. He's just trying to show off. Probably made half of it up. I paused behind a wall, out of sight. You know, he used to copy my homework in middle school, she said. I swear to God, Mom. This guy is a fraud. My hands tightened around the tray. He's always been like this, Aunt Evelyn explained, lurking in the background, waiting to cause a commotion. Look at tonight. Christmas Eve of all times. So what does he do? Drops that number in front of everyone. Everyone. It's tasteless and pointless, and I honestly don't believe it. A pause. Should have been Derek, she said. He's the one with real connections. That's when I entered the room. They froze, like performers caught out of character. I did not yell. I did not accuse. I simply looked them both in the eyes. I built it from nothing, I remarked calmly. No trust fund, no contacts, no assistants. And the only reason I didn't say anything until today was to safeguard this. I motioned around the room. This illusion of family. Derek opened his mouth, but I continued. I figured if I stayed quiet long enough, you'd stop seeing me as the poor kid in the corner. But now I understand. It never was about me. It was about keeping Derek on his pedestal. Aunt Evelyn straightened. Evan, that's not fair. No, I replied. What isn't fair is witnessing my mother suffer through 18 years of your contempt. Listening to you mock our clothes, occupations and lives while claiming it's all in good fun, that ends tonight. I turned to leave, but Derek murmured, still sounds like a fluke. I paused. Excuse me? He shrugged. Anyone can be lucky, doesn't make you unique. I stared at him. He really gazed. And then I saw it. The crack. The uneasiness behind all the glitz. Because the truth was, he had to think it was luck. He had to. Otherwise, he'd have to confront what I'd accomplished with nothing while he'd relied on everything. Tell you what, I replied. I will bring you to the office next week. Perhaps seeing it up close will help. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. I mean it, I responded, moving closer. I will even let you pitch. We are looking for interns. His smirk disappeared, and that's when Uncle Martin entered, drink in hand, and asked, what's going on in here? My mother entered straight following him. Then, as if the cosmos intended to record this moment in family history, Derek said, you know what? I'm out. He stormed out, grabbing his coat and slamming the door. Everyone in the living room was staring. Aunt Evelyn then turned to my mother and stated, this is why we don't mix ambition with insecurity. Then Uncle Martin dropped his glass to the floor and mumbled, unbelievable. Everyone was looking at us now. My mother took my hand. And in that instant, I realized we had crossed a line that could not be undone. The drive home that night was peaceful. Too quiet. Mom said nothing at first. She simply glanced out the window, hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. As we drove onto the dark lanes that led back to our area, the only sounds were the car's quiet hum and the odd crunch of leaves under the tires. I wanted to say something, perhaps apologize or explain why I had finally spoken after so many years of silence. But part of me couldn't tell if she was angry or simply exhausted. I am tired of enduring. Tired of holding her breath for 2 decades every time we walked into that McMansion, as if we didn't belong. We were tired of pretending we were simply pleased to be included. When we eventually pulled into the driveway, she spoke so softly that I nearly missed it. You didn't have to do that. I switched the engine off. I know. She stared at me. Her voice was composed but her eyes were misty. But I'm glad you did. We sat for a moment longer. Then she got out and strolled into the house, carrying only the pie dish she had prepared earlier that day, untouched, of course. Nobody had even looked at it, not with Aunt Evelyn's organic, imported, hand-whipped Christmas dessert alternatives displayed like a bakery showroom. I followed her inside, locked the door, and stood in the darkened hallway for a while, wondering what to do with the unusual combination of fury and melancholy that had settled in my chest. It wasn't a victory. It was not even satisfaction. There was mourning. For what? I was unsure. Perhaps it's the illusion of family. I spent years wanting to one day be one of them. I believed that achievement would bridge the divide. It turned out that it simply increased its width. The days that followed were tense, but not for the reasons I anticipated. Derek did not reach out. Neither did Aunt Evelyn. Not even a half-hearted let's talk message or a performative phone call to attempt to make things right. Instead, the stillness was audible, purposeful, and heavy. Then came the murmurs. It started when a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months sent me a screenshot of a group text. One of Derek's pals had reportedly began spreading rumors that I had fabricated my company's valuation. Another said I acquired false followers and bots to boost my LinkedIn visibility. Someone else stated I was being probed for fraud, but no one could say by whom. I laughed at first. I truly did, since it was so clear. But then the rumors spread throughout my professional network. A former coworker emailed me. "Hey man, someone passed me a strange message suggesting your company isn't legitimate. You might wish to investigate it." An investor messaged me. "Just wanted to confirm. Is everything above board? We are hearing some buzz." That was when the laughter stopped. I started an internal review. Legal checked all of our papers 3 times. PR prepared a proper reaction in case anything made the news. It did not. But the effort required simply to stay ahead of a falsehood was tiring. Even without evidence, I knew where it was coming from. The timing, wording and tone all screamed Derek. He may not have typed the words personally, but I had no doubt he gave someone permission to smear me silently from the shadows. The issue is, growing up around guys like Derek teaches you how they function. They do not confront. They corrode slowly and discreetly, just enough to create doubt, and make you appear unstable or untrustworthy without ever getting their hands filthy. For a while, it worked. We lost a significant cooperation agreement. We had been cultivating a customer for about a year when she abruptly stopped responding. There was no explanation or follow-up. It was just radio silence. That was the moment I snapped. I remember sitting alone in my actual apartment, which no one in the family had ever seen. With the city lights shining through the window and my laptop open, displaying a blank email draft, I stared at it for over an hour, wondering, should I go public? Should I call him out? Do I release our financials, showing the numbers and names? But deep inside, I knew something else. That is what he would do. He'd get loud, sloppy, and create a scene. But I was not him. I was something else. So I deleted the document and started over. Not the company. Despite the noise, we remained solid. But what about me? My thinking, my sense of worth. I took a break from social media and deleted the LinkedIn app off my phone. I stopped refreshing emails as if they were the key to my sanity. I took lengthy walks without my earplugs and reunited with old mentors, not to network, but to simply talk. I spent more time with my mother, helped her in her garden, and made supper without checking Slack every 10 minutes. Slowly, I discovered the version of myself that I liked. Not the one seeking approval. Not the one quietly competing with a cousin who never played fairly. It's just me. I still ran the corporation, of course, but I stopped allowing it to define me. I began working on a new product in secret, something smaller and more personal. A platform that allows first-generation entrepreneurs to access resources and coaching without having to pay thousands of dollars for webinars or boot camps. I didn't announce it. I did not raise money. I simply constructed it. Nights, weekends, in between meetings, silently, as if planting seeds that no one else can see. One day my mother came into my home office with 2 mugs of tea and observed, "You look lighter." I looked up from my laptop. "Lighter?" She nodded. "Like you're not carrying so much." I thought about it. "Maybe I'm just carrying different things now." She smiled. "Good, allow Derek to bear the rest." The problem is, I hadn't said his name since that night. She had never done so. It was as if we both knew without saying it that he no longer had room in our minds. But life had other intentions. A few months later, I received an invitation. A true printed card with heavy board and embossed letters. Derek and Sienna's engagement celebration, hosted at a private vineyard. Dress code black tie. I blinked. Sienna. Something about that name drew me in. And then I remembered she was the girl Derek was talking about on Christmas Eve last year. The part-time model. He described himself as classy but not arrogant. She understands how to be both attractive and conversational. I placed the invitation on my desk and didn't think much about it until the second card arrived a few weeks later. "We would love to see you there, cousin. Let us put the past behind us. Derek." Handwritten. I stared at it for a long time because the tone seemed off. Too eager. Too polished. I checked the return address. It wasn't simply a vineyard. It was the same one my company had been looking into for a potential client retreat. I had not disclosed it to anyone. Coincidence? Maybe. But then I entered my mailbox later that day and discovered a forwarded email. Someone pretending to represent me contacted one of my vendors, requesting cost comparisons and behind-the-scenes information about our event planning process. Derek Lawson's name appeared on the email. There's no title or explanation, just a name. The seller had not responded. She found it unusual and wanted to be sure it wasn't me. And with that I understood it wasn't about reconciliation. This was not about peace. This was about control. Derek was looking for intel to sabotage, or maybe he just wanted to test how far he could go before I pushed back. But he had made one mistake. He had invited me into his universe. And for the first time, I wasn't coming in as an underdog. I walked in as the man who had developed an empire while they were not looking. But I did not RSVP. Not yet. Because the next step has to be careful, considered and neat. Derek wanted to include me in his story. He had no idea I was writing on my own. The invitation remained on my desk for a full week before I touched it again. I had left it there on purpose, close to the prototype sketch for my new startup, one big and glossy card, daring me to return to the same group that had mocked my desire for years, pretending it was all in the past. There was no bridge, only wreckage. And Derek was acting as if he hadn't spent the last few months lighting matches behind my back. But I was no longer angry. Not in the wild, hot way that makes you want to hit a wall or yell at your steering wheel. No, this was colder, more focused, as if a lens had snapped into place. Derek had just given me something he didn't understand was valuable. An opening. And if I played this right, I wouldn't simply gain closure, I was planning to redo the family script. Mom was obviously hesitant. When I casually hinted that I might attend the engagement party, she put down her teacup and asked, "Why would you want to go back into that circus?" "I'm not going back," I replied. "I'm walking in." She narrowed her eyes. "And what are you doing exactly?" "Watching," I said. "Listening. Collecting data." She gave me the same look she used to give me when I attempted to convince her I wasn't sneaking snacks after sleep. But she didn't press. She knew me well enough to recognize when something was brewing, which it was. Derek has always underestimated me. This was his fatal fault. He assumed I was a scrappy coder who got lucky. He didn't know the version of me who had spent years negotiating contracts with multi-million-dollar corporations, conducting due diligence with sharks in suits, or working 20-hour days to fix a major exploit before to a global deployment. He had never seen that side of me because I never let him to, until now. The first thing I did was study the venue. The vineyard was unquestionably high-end, but it was not an untouchable celebrity estate. It was a prestige brand masquerading as exclusive, but it had flaws in its armor. I knew the event manager through an old college acquaintance with whom I had helped create a restaurant POS system years ago when I was working freelance to pay the bills. One phone call later, I was looking at the guest list, floor plans, catering schedule, and, most importantly, the AV setup. I informed her that I was researching locations for a tech retreat and inquired about her security standards for private business launches. She sent me a complete brochure. Derek had no idea. Phase 2 involved reworking the narrative. I understood that in Derek's eyes I was still the outsider, the tech cousin who got fortunate and overreacted on Christmas Eve, so his version of the story, which he'd most likely been spoon-feeding to family over wine and cheese, portrayed him as the generous host attempting to make peace. I needed to change it, but not by confronting him. No, that would just fuel his drama addiction. Instead, I began showing up in unexpected ways. A panel on digital entrepreneurship at a university alumni gathering, where he was planned to attend but not speak. I got a last-minute invitation, gave a keynote, and didn't say anything to him, just let my name resonate across the room while people took photographs and asked for guidance. An op-ed I wrote for a big tech publication about quiet success and the need of growing without approval, with a subtle reference to family dynamics, gatekeeping, and resilience, it became semi-viral. A handful of my extended family members even shared it on Facebook, commenting, "So proud of our Evan," obviously ignorant of the concealed undertone. Then followed the technical podcast. A growing creator asked me to do a deep dive into bootstrapping to millions. I agreed. I told my story, leaving out the names but including enough detail in each anecdote that anyone who knew the family would know who I was talking about. Have you ever been asked to a dinner when everyone eats gold-plated steak and you bring lasagna in a Tupperware? I joked at one point. Yeah, that's when I realized I needed to make my own table. The clip blew up. Derek did not respond, but I knew he saw it. He was too arrogant not to be watching. By the time the celebration was a week away, the pieces had begun to move. My legal team had completed the paperwork for my new startup. The mentorship platform, codenamed North Node, was ready for a limited launch. We'd onboard 60 users from underprivileged neighborhoods and provide them with free access to technologies that would otherwise cost hundreds of dollars I didn't need to earn from it. It was designed for impact, and it was personal because I'd always wanted to provide something I didn't have. A path for children who didn't come with the Derek starter box. But the genuine masterstroke came when I included my old friend Jace. Jace was my first genuine business partner, back when I was still learning how to use invoices. He was loud, charismatic, and now runs a boutique public relations agency. He owed me a favor from a long time ago, something about saving him from a terrible cryptocurrency sponsorship. "Whatever you need," he informed me on the phone. "You want me to crash the party disguised as a magician? Fake a scandal?" "Nothing that messy," I said, laughing. "Just need a spotlight." I provided him the details, including the date, time, guest list, and one very specific name: Derek's employer. Derek turned out not to be as enterprising as he claimed. He'd rebranded his current position as something more impressive than it was: strategic consultant, whatever that meant. But, according to Jace's background team, he was hanging to a job at a mid-size company hoping to break into AI. Jace had previously collaborated with the CEO of that company, Charles Whitmore, on an unsuccessful app launch 2 years ago. "Bring him as a +1, I instructed. "Done," Jace responded. "Are you certain you want to do this?" "I'm sure." That Friday, I received the final confirmation I had been waiting for. The vineyard was ready. Derek's team had requested additional audio-visual equipment for a presentation section. I knew what that meant: a slideshow with photographs of him and Sienna looking stunning. Perhaps a toast, a career brag, an opportunity to impress, or a chance to hijack. But not with turmoil, with clarity. I had one more call to make. "Hey man," I responded, dialing an old number from my accelerator days. "Do you still have access to the portable mini projectors? The discreet kind?" "Sure do," he said. "Have you have an event?" "Something like that." Saturday arrived like a sluggish drum roll. I wore a fitted charcoal suit, clean, basic, and sharp, without a flashy watch. No designer label is screaming for attention. It's just confidence. The kind that does not require permission to enter a room. When I arrived, the venue was hopping. Champagne flutes clinked beneath golden lights suspended between grape trellises. Guests strolled around in manicured semi-casual elegance, laughing a little too loudly and hugging as if they had just finalized multi-million-dollar transactions. Derek was, of course, at the heart of everything. Tan grinned, his arm wrapped around Sienna like a human trophy case. He spotted me in seconds. His face twitched briefly. Then he stepped over, smiling. "Evan," he shouted, his voice barely loud enough for the nearby cluster to hear. "Didn't think you'd show." "Just here to celebrate," I replied, echoing his tone. "Appreciate it," he said, leaning in. "So you finally found out how to wear a proper suit, huh?" I smiled. "Guess you finally figured out how to invite people." He flinched, just barely, and walked away. For the next hour, I mingled. Polite, detached, watching, and waiting. At 8:30 p.m. the lights faded. Derek took the microphone. "Thanks everyone for being here," the man remarked. "Tonight isn't just about love. It's about legacy." I nearly choked on my drink. He went on to talk about hard work, vision, sacrifice, and how establishing something real requires guts. About how he and Sienna were starting a new business, real estate tech of all things, and how they were constantly looking for strategic partners. Then came the slideshow. Photos, logos, and fancy jargon that meant nothing. One slide even included a mock-up of a platform that looked suspiciously like North Node. I glanced at it, knowing he'd taken it or attempted to. The code was different. The branding was off. But the flow, the layout, and the aim were all mine. The vendor I caught snooping on weeks ago must have disclosed enough information for Derek to create a false pitch deck. I should have been furious, but I remained cool since this was great. He was about to fly dangerously near to the sun, and I was holding the matches. The room went dark again as Derek moved on to the next slide, a spectacular depiction of his new platform. A logo flickered on the screen, a cumbersome half-baked design that appeared to have been put together by someone who thought Canva made you a designer. The tagline underneath said, "Empowering young visionaries, unlocking potential. The future is now." I almost chuckled, not because of the message, but because the layout, structure, and entire thing were lifted from an internal North Node pitch deck that I had shared with only 4 people in a password-protected Dropbox, so that confirmed it. Derek was no longer just posturing, he stole. And now he was doing it on a projector screen in front of 120 guests at a vineyard packed with local influencers, tech investors, and a CEO who suspected Derek of fraud. The same CEO who was standing in the back of the room with Jace, mumbling and slowly shaking his head. Derek was still talking. I have always believed in leading with vision and purpose. And when Sienna and I went down to draw up this concept, we realized we were onto something significant, something that might change the world. I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed the button on the remote I had programmed to control the venue's secondary projector, which my contact had surreptitiously connected behind the main display earlier that day. The screen behind Derek abruptly turned black. He hesitated, puzzled. Then a new slide appeared. Pure white backdrop with one sentence in bold black font. This is what real vision looks like. Gasps, murmurs, and a few laughs. Derek turned around. What the? Before he could finish, the screen switched again. Slide 1 shows a time-stamped email sequence from my inbox with the subject line, North Node Prototype Access Confidential. Slide 2 shows the original North Node dashboard design side by side with the one Derek just shown. Slide 3. A highlighted paragraph from a non-disclosure agreement with a vendor that had disclosed information, signed by T. Warner as Derek's college roommate. Slide 4 shows a list of known IP addresses that accessed our development portal without permission. One of them matched the Wi-Fi network Derek Home 5G. Slide 5. A video of myself from just 3 weeks ago at an early North Node onboarding session. In the video I state, "We don't just make tools, we make ladders for children who have been advised not to climb." Silence. A genuine, resounding quiet. Derek was stopped, his mouth slightly open, eyes wild, and still clutching the mic as if it were the only thing keeping him standing. Then Jace walked up, loud, confident, and captivating. "Folks," he exclaimed, grinning. "Sorry for the surprise presentation, but we figured you deserved to see the real future." He motioned to me. "This is Evan Clean, the creator and CEO of North Node. His platform is already aiding young entrepreneurs from 4 continents. There are no phony decks or stolen designs. It's just impact. Real, measurable impact." I did not move. I did not smile. I just met Derek's eyes from across the room. He attempted to speak. "Wait. This isn't..." But no one was listening because everyone was whispering, pointing, and taking out their phones. Then came the voice that sealed everything. Derek's boss. He moved forward carefully, holding a glass of red wine as if he were about to make a toast. "I had my doubts," he remarked, his voice silky yet firm. "But this is something else." Derek turned to him begging. "Sir, I did not know. Someone must have sent the deck. I assumed it was a reference." The CEO raised a hand. "Don't. Just don't." He turned to Jace. "Can I speak with you and Mr. Clean outside?" Jace winked. "Of course." As the 3 of us walked by Derek, I hesitated. "By the way," I said, leaning in so only he could hear, "you should probably stop using public Wi-Fi to steal code." He looked at me, stunned. I did not wait for a response. Outside, beneath the vineyard's canopy lights, the air smelled like grapes and gasoline. The CEO shook my hand. "Hell of a move in there." I shrugged. "Just tired of being polite." "I respect that," he replied. He took out a business card. "If you're ever looking for acquisition partners, real ones, give me a call." I nodded. "I'll think about it." Jace chuckled. "That went better than planned." "I'm not done," I replied. Because the true fallout hadn't even begun. By the next morning, the vineyard incident footage had spread on Instagram stories and Twitter. Someone had captured the instant the screen switched. When the slide with Derek's IP address appeared, another person zoomed in on his face. By lunchtime, a tech blog had caught up on it. Derek's LinkedIn profile was removed on Sunday. On Monday, my mother called me. Her tone was cautious. "Evan, did you really have to go so far?" I took a breath. "Perhaps not. But Mom, he wasn't going to stop. Not until he breaks something I built." She was silent for a second. Then she answered, "You did not break him. He did it to himself." And she was correct. Derek did not merely lose his job or reputation. He lost the one thing that defined his identity. The appearance of success. The controlled character, and the constant performance. Without it, he was simply a man in a suit with nothing to say. 4 weeks later, I launched North Node officially. We received press. Investors reached out. I declined most of them. I wanted to keep things clean, I wanted to retain it for myself. Mom attended the launch. She wore her nicest coat. Cried as she witnessed the first mentorship circle form around a group of low-income teens. "Is this what you've been doing all these nights?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "Yeah," I replied. "This is what I've been building while they weren't watching." I never saw Derek again after the party. But I heard he applied for a job at a business accelerator a few cities away. Did not get it. Apparently, one of the interviewers had been to the vineyard that night. Small world. Funny how that works. You grow up believing that proving them incorrect is the best way to exact retribution, but this is not the case. The finest retribution is to prove yourself right. And then let them choke on the stillness that follows. Because I didn't simply establish a business, I created a legacy. Something they'll never be able to replicate. He blinked. Huh? He then looked around the table as if I had just chanted a spell in Latin. "Man, you always were the technical one." Aunt Evelyn laughed politely, as if I had made a joke. Then something unexpected happened, like a smack. "Actually," she remarked, turning to my mother in the tone of someone ordering wallpaper samples. "Evelyn Porter. You remember her, correct? Her son currently works for Amazon full-time stock options. You must be very proud, Evan." My mother looked up, puzzled. She gave a tight-lipped smile. "That is nice. But Evan is doing fine on his own." Aunt Evelyn waved her hand. "Oh, of course. It's just good to see young people finding something safe these days." I clenched my jaw. Secure. That word, again. As if I were a ticking time bomb of squandered opportunities and terrible choices. Like I had no idea what I was doing with my life. It was as if everything I'd developed was a side project that I'd abandon once I reached adulthood. Derek took the cue. "Actually, Mom, speaking of stability, I've been meaning to ask you something, Evan." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice lowering to a phony sincerity. "Have you ever thought about selling? I know some investors who are looking for little businesses like yours. You could make 6 figures, maybe low 7s if you play your cards well." My mother stared at me, concern on her face. I took a deep breath. "We passed 22 million in ARR last quarter." Silence. It was the kind of silence that lands hard and elicits a dozen bewildered looks. Even the clink of cutlery ceased. Derek blinked. "Sorry, what?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "Annual recurrent income exceeds 22 million. We closed our Series B round 7 months ago." Uncle Martin's laugh was short and harsh. "You're joking." I shake my head. "Nope. We're currently valued at slightly around 28 million. We intend to buy out within the next 20 months. Another beat of stillness. Aunt Evelyn appeared to have been slapped with a frigid Christmas turkey leg. Derek's mouth opened and then closed. My mother glanced at me with wide eyes. "You never told me that." I shrugged. "Didn't think anyone wanted to hear about my little tech thing." Derek scoffed. Come on, man. That is not how valuations work. You'd need what? Teams, offices, legal and accounting." "We have all of that," I explained gently. "We outsourced the first few years and then created ourselves. There are 4 offices today. Amsterdam, Austin, Singapore, and a distant hub, 52 full-time employees and 41 contractors." He leaned back, his smirk twitching as if it wanted to collapse into something less desirable. "So you're saying you have 28 million? I am claiming the corporation is. I pay myself modestly. The majority of it is in equity." Aunt Evelyn, bless her cold heart, recovered first. "Well," she remarked, reaching for the wine. "Ain't that something?" But the atmosphere had changed. You could feel it, like if someone had turned off the electricity, and all the glossy facades were dimming. Except for Derek. No one really knew what to say. He rose up, walked around the table and clapped my back as if we were fraternity brothers. "Well, damn, cousin," he exclaimed loudly. "I suppose I underestimated you." I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. Guess so. That should have been the end of it. A fresh start, a new dynamic. Perhaps even a little respect. But Derek was not designed for that. Neither was Aunt Evelyn. The mood at supper did not improve. Dessert was unusually quiet. Derek wanted to return to familiar grounds. "Have you ever met Elon? You should speak with him. Yet his voice was fragile, like someone attempting to keep their footing on a fractured sheet of ice. Aunt Evelyn, on the other hand, made a point of noting Derek's new condo's heated marble floors and authentic Versace tile in the bathroom, which felt like the verbal equivalent of tossing a glitter bomb and asking for everyone to be impressed. We were not. As people began to leave, my mother and I helped clean the dishes. She didn't say anything, simply a slight nod that conveyed more than words. But then, as I was bringing in the last tray from the dining room, I heard something. Say, who would hide something like that from their family? Aunt Evelyn's voice was shrill, muttering through clenched teeth. It's false and manipulative, Derek murmured. He's just trying to show off. Probably made half of it up. I paused behind a wall, out of sight. You know, he used to copy my homework in middle school, she said. I swear to God, Mom. This guy's a fraud. My hands tightened around the tray. He's always been like this, Aunt Evelyn explained, lurking in the background, waiting to cause a commotion. Look at tonight, Christmas Eve of all times. So what does he do? Drops that number in front of everyone. Everyone. It's tasteless and pointless, and I honestly don't believe it. A pause. Should have been Derek, she said. He's the one with real connections. That's when I entered the room. They froze, like performers caught out of character. I did not yell. I did not accuse. I simply looked them both in the eyes. I built it from nothing, I remarked calmly. No trust fund, no contacts, no assistants. And the only reason I didn't say anything until today was to safeguard this. I motioned around the room. This illusion of family. Derek opened his mouth, but I continued. I figured if I stayed quiet long enough, you'd stop seeing me as the poor kid in the corner. But now I understand. It never was about me. It was about keeping Derek on his pedestal. Aunt Evelyn straightened. Evan, that's not fair. No, I replied. What isn't fair is witnessing my mother suffer through 18 years of your contempt. Listening to you mock our clothes, occupations, and lives while claiming it's all in good fun that ends tonight. I turned to leave, but Derek murmured. Still sounds like a fluke. I paused. Excuse me? He shrugged. Anyone can be lucky, doesn't make you unique. I stared at him. He really gazed. And then I saw it. The crack. The uneasiness behind all the glitz. Because the truth was, he had to think it was luck he had to. Otherwise, he'd have to confront what I'd accomplished with nothing while he'd relied on everything. Tell you what, I replied. I will bring you to the office next week. Perhaps seeing it up close will help. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. I mean it, I responded, moving closer. I will even let you pitch. We are looking for interns. His smirk disappeared. And that's when Uncle Martin entered, drink in hand, and asked, What's going on in here? My mother entered straight following him. Then, as if the cosmos intended to record this moment in family history, Derek said, You know what? I'm out. He stormed out, grabbing his coat and slamming the door. Everyone in the living room was staring. Aunt Evelyn then turned to my mother and stated, This is why we don't mix ambition with insecurity. Then Uncle Martin dropped his glass to the floor and mumbled, Unbelievable. Everyone was looking at us now. My mother took my hand. And in that instant, I realized we had crossed a line that could not be undone. The drive home that night was peaceful. Too quiet. Mom said nothing at first. She simply glanced out the window, hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. As we drove onto the dark lanes that led back to our area, the only sounds were the car's quiet hum and the odd crunch of leaves under the tires. I wanted to say something, perhaps apologize or explain why I had finally spoken after so many years of silence. But part of me couldn't tell if she was angry or simply exhausted. I am tired of enduring. Tired of holding her breath for 2 decades every time we walked into that McMansion, as if we didn't belong. We were tired of pretending we were simply pleased to be included. When we eventually pulled into the driveway, she spoke so softly that I nearly missed it. You didn't have to do that. I switched the engine off. I know. She stared at me. Her voice was composed but her eyes were misty. But I'm glad you did. We sat for a moment longer. Then she got out and strolled into the house, carrying only the pie dish she had prepared earlier that day, untouched of course. Nobody had even looked at it, not with Aunt Evelyn's organic imported hand-whipped Christmas dessert alternatives displayed like a bakery showroom. I followed her inside, locked the door, and stood in the darkened hallway for a while, wondering what to do with the unusual combination of fury and melancholy that had settled in my chest. It wasn't a victory. It was not even satisfaction. There was mourning. For what? I was unsure. Perhaps it's the illusion of family. I spent years wanting to one day be one of them. I believed that achievement would bridge the divide. It turned out that it simply increased its width. The days that followed were tense, but not for the reasons I anticipated. Derek did not reach out. Neither did Aunt Evelyn. Not even a half-hearted let's talk message or a performative phone call to attempt to make things right. Instead, the stillness was audible, purposeful, and heavy. Then came the murmurs. It started when a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months sent me a screenshot of a group text. One of Derek's pals had reportedly began spreading rumors that I had fabricated my company's valuation. Another said I acquired false followers and bots to boost my LinkedIn visibility. Someone else stated I was being probed for fraud, but no one could say by whom. I laughed at first. I truly did, since it was so clear. But then the rumors spread throughout my professional network. A former coworker emailed me. "Hey man, someone passed me a strange message suggesting your company isn't legitimate. You might wish to investigate it." An investor messaged me. "Just wanted to confirm. Is everything above board? We are hearing some buzz." That was when the laughter stopped. I started an internal review. Legal checked all of our papers 3 times. PR prepared a proper reaction in case anything made the news. It did not. But the effort required simply to stay ahead of a falsehood was tiring. Even without evidence, I knew where it was coming from. The timing, wording, and tone all screamed Derek. He may not have typed the words personally, but I had no doubt he gave someone permission to smear me silently from the shadows. The issue is, growing up around guys like Derek teaches you how they function. They do not confront. They corrode slowly and discreetly, just enough to create doubt and make you appear unstable or untrustworthy without ever getting their hands filthy. For a while, it worked. We lost a significant cooperation agreement. We had been cultivating a customer for about a year when she abruptly stopped responding. There was no explanation or follow-up. It was just radio silence. That was the moment I snapped. I remember sitting alone in my actual apartment, which no one in the family had ever seen. With the city lights shining through the window and my laptop open, displaying a blank email draft, I stared at it for over an hour, wondering, should I go public? Should I call him out? Do I release our financials, showing the numbers and names? But deep inside, I knew something else. That is what he would do. He'd get loud, sloppy, and create a scene. But I was not him. I was something else. So I deleted the document and started over. Not the company. Despite the noise, we remained solid. But what about me? My thinking. My sense of worth. I took a break from social media and deleted the LinkedIn app off my phone. I stopped refreshing emails as if they were the key to my sanity. I took lengthy walks without my earplugs and reunited with old mentors, not to network, but to simply talk. I spent more time with my mother, helped her in her garden, and made supper without checking Slack every 10 minutes. Slowly, I discovered the version of myself that I liked. Not the one seeking approval, not the one quietly competing with a cousin who never played fairly. It's just me. I still ran the corporation, of course, but I stopped allowing it to define me. I began working on a new product in secret, something smaller and more personal. A platform that allows first-generation entrepreneurs to access resources and coaching without having to pay thousands of dollars for webinars or boot camps. I didn't announce it. I did not raise money. I simply constructed it. Nights, weekends, in between meetings, silently. As if planting seeds that no one else can see. One day, my mother came into my home office with 2 mugs of tea and observed, "You look lighter." I looked up from my laptop. "Lighter?" She nodded. "Like you're not carrying so much." I thought about it. Maybe I'm just carrying different things now. She smiled. "Good. Allow Derek to bear the rest." The problem is, I hadn't said his name since that night. She had never done so. It was as if we both knew without saying it that he no longer had room in our minds. But life had other intentions. A few months later, I received an invitation. A true printed card with heavy board and embossed letters. Derek and Sienna's engagement celebration, hosted at a private vineyard, dress code black tie. I blinked. Sienna. Something about that name drew me in. And then I remembered she was the girl Derek was talking about on Christmas Eve last year. The part-time model. He described himself as classy but not arrogant. She understands how to be both attractive and conversational. I placed the invitation on my desk and didn't think much about it until the second card arrived a few weeks later. We would love to see you there, cousin. Let us put the past behind us. Derek. Handwritten. I stared at it for a long time because the tone seemed off. Too eager, too polished. I checked the return address. It wasn't simply a vineyard, it was the same one my company had been looking into for a potential client retreat. I had not disclosed it to anyone. Coincidence? Maybe. But then I entered my mailbox later that day and discovered a forwarded email. Someone pretending to represent me contacted one of my vendors, requesting cost comparisons and behind-the-scenes information about our event planning process. Derek Lawson's name appeared on the email. There's no title or explanation, just a name. The seller had not responded. She found it unusual and wanted to be sure it wasn't me. And with that, I understood it wasn't about reconciliation. This was not about peace. This was about control. Derek was looking for intel to sabotage. Or maybe he just wanted to test how far he could go before I pushed back. But he had made one mistake. He had invited me into his universe. And for the first time, I wasn't coming in as an underdog. I walked in as the man who had developed an empire while they were not looking. But I did not RSVP, not yet. Because the next step has to be careful, considered, and neat. Derek wanted to include me in his story. He had no idea I was writing on my own. The invitation remained on my desk for a full week before I touched it again. I had left it there on purpose, close to the prototype sketch for my new startup, one big and glossy card, daring me to return to the same group that had mocked my desire for years, pretending it was all in the past. There was no bridge, only wreckage. And Derek was acting as if he hadn't spent the last few months lighting matches behind my back. But I was no longer angry. Not in the wild, hot way that makes you want to hit a wall or yell at your steering wheel. No. This was colder, more focused, as if a lens had snapped into place. Derek had just given me something he didn't understand was valuable. An opening. And if I played this right, I wouldn't simply gain closure. I was planning to redo the family script. Mom was obviously hesitant. When I casually hinted that I might attend the engagement party, she put down her teacup and asked, "Why would you want to go back into that circus?" "I'm not going back," I replied. "I'm walking in." She narrowed her eyes. "And what are you doing exactly?" "Watching," I said. "Listening. Collecting data." She gave me the same look she used to give me when I attempted to convince her I wasn't sneaking snacks after sleep, but she didn't press. She knew me well enough to recognize when something was brewing, which it was. Derek has always underestimated me. This was his fatal fault. He assumed I was a scrappy coder who got lucky. He didn't know the version of me who had spent years negotiating contracts with multi-million-dollar corporations, conducting due diligence with sharks in suits, or working 20-hour days to fix a major exploit before to a global deployment. He had never seen that side of me because I never let him to, until now. The first thing I did was study the venue. The vineyard was unquestionably high-end, but it was not an untouchable celebrity estate. It was a prestige brand masquerading as exclusive, but it had flaws in its armor. I knew the event manager through an old college acquaintance with whom I had helped create a restaurant POS system years ago when I was working freelance to pay the bills. One phone call later, I was looking at the guest list, floor plans, catering schedule, and most importantly, the AV setup. I informed her that I was researching locations for a tech retreat and inquired about her security standards for private business launches. She sent me a complete brochure. Derek had no idea. Phase 2 involved reworking the narrative. I understood that in Derek's eyes, I was still the outsider, the tech cousin who got fortunate and overreacted on Christmas Eve. So his version of the story, which he'd most likely been spoon-feeding to family over wine and cheese, portrayed him as the generous host attempting to make peace. I needed to change it, but not by confronting him. No, that would just fuel his drama addiction. Instead, I began showing up in unexpected ways. A panel on digital entrepreneurship at a university alumni gathering, where he was planned to attend but not speak. I got a last-minute invitation, gave a keynote, and didn't say anything to him, just let my name resonate across the room while people took photographs and asked for guidance. An op-ed I wrote for a big tech publication about quiet success and the need of growing without approval, with a subtle reference to family dynamics, gatekeeping, and resilience. It became semi-viral. A handful of my extended family members even shared it on Facebook, commenting, "So proud of our Evan," obviously ignorant of the concealed undertone. Then followed the technical podcast. A growing creator asked me to do a deep dive into bootstrapping to millions. I agreed. I told my story, leaving out the names but including enough detail in each anecdote that anyone who knew the family would know who I was talking about. Have you ever been asked to a dinner when everyone eats gold-plated steak and you bring lasagna in a Tupperware? I joked at one point. Yeah, that's when I realized I needed to make my own table. The clip blew up. Derek did not respond, but I knew he saw it. He was too arrogant not to be watching. By the time the celebration was a week away, the pieces had begun to move. My legal team had completed the paperwork for my new startup. The mentorship platform, codenamed North Node, was ready for a limited launch. We'd onboard 60 users from underprivileged neighborhoods and provide them with free access to technologies that would otherwise cost hundreds of dollars I didn't need to earn from it. It was designed for impact, and it was personal because I'd always wanted to provide something I didn't have, a path for children who didn't come with the Derek starter box. But the genuine masterstroke came when I included my old friend Jace. Jace was my first genuine business partner, back when I was still learning how to use invoices. He was loud, charismatic, and now runs a boutique public relations agency. He owed me a favor from a long time ago, something about saving him from a terrible cryptocurrency sponsorship. "Whatever you need," he informed me on the phone. "You want me to crash the party disguised as a magician? Fake a scandal?" "Nothing that messy," I said, laughing. "Just need a spotlight." I provided him the details, including the date, time, guest list, and one very specific name. Derek's employer. Derek turned out not to be as enterprising as he claimed. He'd rebranded his current position as something more impressive than it was: strategic consultant, whatever that meant. But, according to Jace's background team, he was hanging to a job at a mid-size company hoping to break into AI. Jace had previously collaborated with the CEO of that company, Charles Whitmore, on an unsuccessful app launch 2 years ago. "Bring him as a +1, I instructed. "Done," Jace responded. "Are you certain you want to do this?" "I'm sure." That Friday, I received the final confirmation I had been waiting for. The vineyard was ready. Derek's team had requested additional audio-visual equipment for a presentation section. I knew what that meant. A slideshow with photographs of him and Sienna looking stunning. Perhaps a toast, a career brag, an opportunity to impress, or a chance to hijack. But not with turmoil, with clarity. I had one more call to make. "Hey man," I responded, dialing an old number from my accelerator days. "Do you still have access to the portable mini projectors?" "The discreet kind." "Sure do," he said. Have an event?" "Something like that." Saturday arrived like a sluggish drum roll. I wore a fitted charcoal suit, clean, basic and sharp, without a flashy watch. No designer label is screaming for attention, it's just confidence. The kind that does not require permission to enter a room. When I arrived, the venue was hopping. Champagne flutes clinked beneath golden lights suspended between grape trellises. Guests strolled around in manicured semi-casual elegance, laughing a little too loudly and hugging as if they had just finalized multi-million-dollar transactions. Derek was, of course, at the heart of everything. Tan grinned, his arm wrapped around Sienna like a human trophy case. He spotted me in seconds. His face twitched briefly. Then he stepped over, smiling. "Evan," he shouted, his voice barely loud enough for the nearby cluster to hear. "Didn't think you'd show." "Just here to celebrate," I replied, echoing his tone. "Appreciate it," he said, leaning in. "So you finally found out how to wear a proper suit, huh?" I smiled. "Guess you finally figured out how to invite people." He flinched, just barely, and walked away. For the next hour I mingled, polite, detached, watching, and waiting. At 8:30 p.m. the lights faded. Derek took the microphone. "Thanks everyone for being here," the man remarked. "Tonight isn't just about love. It's about legacy." I nearly choked on my drink. He went on to talk about hard work, vision, sacrifice, and how establishing something real requires guts. About how he and Sienna were starting a new business, real estate tech, of all things, and how they were constantly looking for strategic partners. Then came the slideshow. Photos, logos, and fancy jargon that meant nothing. One slide even included a mock-up of a platform that looked suspiciously like North Node. I glanced at it, knowing he'd taken it, or attempted to. The code was different. The branding was off. But the flow, the layout, and the aim were all mine. The vendor I caught snooping on weeks ago must have disclosed enough information for Derek to create a false pitch deck. I should have been furious, but I remained cool since this was great. He was about to fly dangerously near to the sun, and I was holding the matches. The room went dark again as Derek moved on to the next slide, a spectacular depiction of his new platform. A logo flickered on the screen, a cumbersome half-baked design that appeared to have been put together by someone who thought Canva made you a designer. The tagline underneath said, "Empowering young visionaries, unlocking potential. The future is now." I almost chuckled, not because of the message, but because the layout, structure and entire thing were lifted from an internal North Node pitch deck that I had shared with only 4 people in a password-protected Dropbox, so that confirmed it. Derek was no longer just posturing. He stole. And now he was doing it on a projector screen in front of 120 guests at a vineyard packed with local influencers, tech investors, and a CEO who suspected Derek of fraud. The same CEO who was standing in the back of the room with Jace, mumbling and slowly shaking his head. Derek was still talking. "I have always believed in leading with vision and purpose. And when Sienna and I went down to draw up this concept, we realized we were onto something significant. Something that might change the world." I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed the button on the remote I had programmed to control the venue's secondary projector, which my contact had surreptitiously connected behind the main display earlier that day. The screen behind Derek abruptly turned black. He hesitated, puzzled. Then a new slide appeared. Pure white backdrop with one sentence in bold black font. "This is what real vision looks like." Gasps, murmurs and a few laughs. Derek turned around. "What the?" Before he could finish, the screen switched again. Slide 1 shows a time-stamped email sequence from my inbox with the subject line, "North Node Prototype Access Confidential." Slide 2 shows the original North Node dashboard design side by side with the one Derek just shown. Slide 3, a highlighted paragraph from a non-disclosure agreement with a vendor that had disclosed information, signed by T. Warner as Derek's college roommate. Slide 4 shows a list of known IP addresses that accessed our development portal without permission. One of them matched the Wi-Fi network, Derek Home 5G. Slide 5, a video of myself from just 3 weeks ago, at an early North Node onboarding session. In the video, I state, "We don't just make tools. We make ladders for children who have been advised not to climb." Silence. A genuine, resounding quiet. Derek was stopped, his mouth slightly open, eyes wild, and still clutching the mic as if it were the only thing keeping him standing. Then Jace walked up, loud, confident, and captivating. "Folks," he exclaimed, grinning. "Sorry for the surprise presentation, but we figured you deserve to see the real future." He motioned to me. "This is Evan Clean, the creator and CEO of North Node. His platform is already aiding young entrepreneurs from 4 continents. There are no phony decks or stolen designs. It's just impact. Real, measurable impact." I did not move, I did not smile. I just met Derek's eyes from across the room. He attempted to speak. "Wait, this isn't..." But no one was listening because everyone was whispering, pointing, and taking out their phones. Then came the voice that sealed everything. Derek's boss. He moved forward carefully, holding a glass of red wine as if he were about to make a toast. "I had my doubts," he remarked, his voice silky yet firm. "But this is something else." Derek turned to him, begging. "Sir, I did not know. Someone must have sent the deck. I assumed it was a reference." The CEO raised a hand. "Don't. Just don't." He turned to Jace. "Can I speak with you and Mr. Clean outside?" Jace winked. "Of course." As the 3 of us walked by Derek, I hesitated. "By the way," I said, leaning in so only he could hear, "you should probably stop using public Wi-Fi to steal code." He looked at me, stunned. I did not wait for a response. Outside beneath the vineyard's canopy lights, the air smelled like grapes and gasoline. The CEO shook my hand. "Hell of a move in there." I shrugged. "Just tired of being polite." "I respect that," he replied. He took out a business card. "If you're ever looking for acquisition partners, real ones, give me a call." I nodded. "I'll think about it." Jace chuckled. "That went better than planned." "I'm not done," I replied. Because the true fallout hadn't even begun. By the next morning, the vineyard incident footage had spread on Instagram stories and Twitter. Someone had captured the instant the screen switched. When the slide with Derek's IP address appeared, another person zoomed in on his face. By lunchtime, a tech blog had caught up on it. Derek's LinkedIn profile was removed on Sunday. On Monday, my mother called me. Her tone was cautious. "Evan, did you really have to go so far?" I took a breath. "Perhaps not. But Mom, he wasn't going to stop. Not until he breaks something I built." She was silent for a second. Then she answered, "You did not break him. He did it to himself." And she was correct. Derek did not merely lose his job or reputation. He lost the one thing that defined his identity: the appearance of success, the controlled character, and the constant performance. Without it, he was simply a man in a suit with nothing to say. 4 weeks later, I launched North Node officially. We received press, investors reached out. I declined most of them. I wanted to keep things clean, I wanted to retain it for myself. Mom attended the launch. She wore her nicest coat. Cried as she witnessed the first mentorship circle form around a group of low-income teens. "Is this what you've been doing all these nights?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "Yeah," I replied. "This is what I've been building while they weren't watching." I never saw Derek again after the party, but I heard he applied for a job at a business accelerator a few cities away. Did not get it. Apparently one of the interviewers had been to the vineyard that night. Small world. Funny how that works. You grow up believing that proving them incorrect is the best way to exact retribution, but this is not the case. The finest retribution is to prove yourself right, and then let them choke on the stillness that follows. Because I didn't simply establish a business, I created a legacy. Something they'll never be able to replicate. Parents left me in foster care for a beach life at 12. At 23, they were begging me for help. So I kicked them out of my graduation party. My name is Noah and I'm 24. But this story begins years ago, when I was just 12. Back then I felt my family was quite average, or what I considered to be typical. We weren't rich, but we had a decent house and clothes, and everything looked to be going well. Diane and Russell, my parents, acted as if nothing was wrong. Well, until it was. Then there was my sister Lily. Lily was the golden child, you know the type. Teachers adored her. Her parents could not stop gushing about her. If she sneezed that much, it was regarded as a masterpiece. Me? I was only Noah. It wasn't that I was a bad kid, but everything I did was just background noise. Lily received the fridge space for her drawings, while I got a slap on the back and a "That's nice, Noah." And the truth is, I didn't resent Lily for it. It wasn't her fault they treated her like a trophy and me as if I didn't exist, but it made me feel unimportant. Anyway, the day everything came apart began very routinely. I was in my room, playing with some old action figures that I hadn't completely outgrown yet. Diane then summoned me downstairs in that strange voice parents use when they're trying to appear calm, but you can tell something's up. I figured I had left the milk out or forgotten to do a task. When I walked into the living room, Russell and Diane were both sitting on the couch, looking far too serious to be discussing milk. "Sit down, Noah," Russell instructed, motioning to the chair across from them. His tone was tight, as if this were a meeting rather than a family talk. Diane, on the other hand, was doing her best to be empathetic, but something felt odd. I sat down, confused. Diane took a big breath and stated, "Noah, we need to talk about something important." My immediate reaction was that somebody had died. Perhaps it was a grandfather I scarcely knew. But then Russell stated, "We've had some financial difficulties and can't afford to take care of you anymore." At first, I assumed I had misheard him. "What do you mean can't afford to take care of me? Am I some kind of subscription you're canceling?" I just gazed at them, trying to absorb what he'd said. But Diane kept going. "It's not your fault, sweetie. This is something we've been struggling with for a while, and we had to make a really hard decision." A difficult decision, right? They made it sound as if they were considering which cable package to keep, not whether or not to abandon their child. I inquired what they meant, hoping it wasn't what it sounded like. Diane stated that they had found me a foster home, but it was just temporary. She continued uttering that word as if it was meant to make me feel better. "Why can't Lily go to the foster home?" I said. I was desperate to comprehend. Diane's face grew chilly for a short second before she said, "Lily's in school, Noah. She needs stability." Stability? As if I didn't? Russell interjected before I could say anything else. "This isn't about choosing one of you over the other, it's about what makes the most sense right now." I started crying, and it wasn't the silent type. It was ugly. Full-fledged crying. Because how else would a 12-year-old react when told his parents are giving up on him? Diane attempted to hug me, but I pulled her away. "Why are you doing this?" I asked again, but all they did was regurgitate the same rehearsed phrases about difficult decisions and financial troubles. The following day, they prepared a tiny bag for me and drove me to the foster home. The ride there was quiet. Not the kind of quiet where people are deep in concentration, but the kind where the tension is palpable in every breath. I continued staring at them, expecting that one of them would crack, glance back at me and say, "This is a mistake. You're returning home." But they didn't. When we arrived at the house, I waited in the car for a bit, thinking they'd change their minds. Russell turned around and said, "Come on, Noah. Let's get this over with." As if it were a duty he merely wanted to mark off his list. I got out of the car, clutching the duffel bag they had packed for me. The foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, were standing at the entrance. They appeared pleasant, but I scarcely noticed them. All I could think of was that my parents were ready to leave me there. Diane knelt in front of me and said, "We love you, Noah. This isn't goodbye forever. Just give it some time, okay?" She kissed my forehead, but it didn't seem reassuring. It felt as if someone had stamped a returned label on me. Russell shook my hand. Neither a hug nor a handshake. Like I was a distant cousin he hardly knew. Then they were gone. I stood on the porch, watching their car disappear down the street, my chest feeling heavier by the second. I kept thinking, they'll be back. They need to come back. However, they didn't. That night I kept repeating the day in my mind. What did I do wrong? Was I not good enough? Why Lily, not me? Those questions stayed with me for weeks. The worst part was that I had no answers. All I had was their word that this would be transitory. Even though I wanted to believe it, I had a nagging feeling that I'd never see them again. Looking back, I understood that was when everything changed. It wasn't simply about their departure. It was about how they left as if I were a burden they were relieved to get rid of. But at 12, I didn't have the words to process it. All I knew was that my parents had driven away and I was alone. Over the next 3 days, the Bennetts attempted to make me feel at ease. Mrs. Bennett prepared pancakes for breakfast every morning. Mr. Bennett would occasionally enter my room and ask me random trivia questions. Despite their attempts, I was not ready to trust them or anybody else. My parents had promised me that this was just temporary, so I clung to it like a lifeline. I kept telling myself that they would call, explain everything, and I'd be home before I knew it. But days slipped into weeks, weeks into years, and they said nothing. It wasn't until I returned to school that I realized how serious my position was. Kids at school noticed I was new and asked me a variety of questions. Where are you from? Why did you relocate here? I didn't have enough energy to explain the reality, so I made up vague replies like, "Oh, my parents are working in another state for a while." Just saying those words made my lips bitter. One afternoon after school, I sat in the Bennett's living room, scrolling through my phone while avoiding schoolwork. That's when I made the mistake of searching for my parents online. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe just an indication that they were still thinking about me. What I discovered instead knocked the wind out of me. They were smiling on a beach with the ocean behind them, appearing happier than I had ever seen them. The caption accompanying the photo said, "Finally living our dream life." As I looked through their photos, my stomach turned. Pictures of exotic holidays, expensive dinners, and, of course, Lily. She appeared in almost every shot, usually front and center, with comments like, "Our amazing daughter." It was as if I did not exist. The longer I scrolled, the angrier I became. They said they couldn't afford to keep me, but here they were, living like influencers. And Lily was not in foster care like me. She was still among them, smiling at the camera as if everything was fine. I felt as if my head was spinning. They hadn't simply abandoned me. They had obliterated me. What struck me the most was not simply the images, it was a travel blog. Yep, they had a blog where they documented their path to freedom. They wrote about how letting go of worldly stuff, or myself, had given them insight. I went down to the comments, but this time something stuck out. There was a comment from an account without a profile photo. It was written, "Must be nice running away and leaving everything behind. Hope it doesn't catch up to you." I frowned. The comments felt cutting, as if they were meant to cut through whatever shiny picture Russell and Diane were attempting to present. My thoughts raced. What did the commenter mean by leaving everything behind? Were they discussing me or something else entirely? I clicked on the comment, but the account was private, and their profile image was simply a blank gray circle. I continued to browse down the page, hoping for more. In another photo of Diane enjoying a tropical drink, someone wrote, "Guess skipping town was worth it after all." My chest clenched as I focused on the words. Leaving town? Why would somebody say that? I read through more comments, but nothing was as pointed as those two. Most people congratulated them and expressed how inspiring their lifestyle was. I wanted to shout at those folks for not seeing beyond the facade. I could not let it go. Are those comments from random trolls, or do they know something I don't? Russell and Diane were used to lying. They had informed me that they couldn't afford to care for me, but this was clearly not true. Was there more to it? I couldn't quit thinking about the questions. But what could I do? I didn't have access to their history or secrets. All I could do was stew on those mysterious words, wondering what else they were hiding. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. It was more than just the lies they told me. It was about how they didn't even feel sorry. They were out there living their best lives, while I was here trying to figure out how to live without them. That night at dinner, the Bennetts sensed something was wrong. I wasn't very covert about my mood. "Are you okay, Noah?" Mr. Bennett said, setting down his fork. "Yeah," I murmured, unwilling to get into it. But Mrs. Bennett was not the sort to take things lightly. "You don't have to tell us if you're not ready, but if something's bothering you, we're here," she replied softly. I glanced at them. These individuals who hardly knew me but seemed to care more than my own parents had. For some reason, I broke. I told them everything, the blog, the photos, and the captions. I anticipated them to tell me to stop looking or that it wasn't important, but they didn't. Mrs. Bennett simply listened, her eyes filled with the quiet sympathy I was still adjusting to. Mr. Bennett, however, appeared enraged. "You have every right to be angry," he stated, leaning forward. "What they did to you, that's not on you. That's on them, and don't let anyone make you think otherwise." It wasn't a big speech, but it hit me. For the first time, someone admitted that what had transpired was not my fault. Over the next 2 weeks, I became more accustomed to life with the Bennetts. They were not flawless, but they were consistent. They inquired about my day, assisted me with my homework, and encouraged me to try new activities. I even started to open up at school, joining a few groups and meeting friends. But my resentment of my parents persisted. If anything, it expanded. But I knew one thing. I would not let their decision define me. So I started joining school clubs. Not because I suddenly wanted to be the most social kid on the planet, but because I needed to keep myself busy. I joined the debate team first. I figured I was used to debating thanks to Russell and Diane, so why not put it to use? It turns out that I was pretty excellent at it. Then I took a part-time job. Mr. Bennett had been hinting for weeks that I may like to spend some money, so I relented and applied at a neighborhood bookstore. It wasn't flashy, but I liked being surrounded by books and people who were willing to talk about them. Furthermore, it provided me with a small taste of independence. Every payment seemed like a step toward a future that was uniquely mine. Somewhere along the way, I met Marco. Marco treated me like a regular child, not a charity case. When I told him about my parents, he merely nodded and said, "That's messed up, man. Want to play video games?" When I got home from school one afternoon, I noticed that the house was unusually quiet. Mrs. Bennett would usually be in the kitchen, humming along to an oldies song while Mr. Bennett worked on something in the garage. However, this time I heard hushed conversations coming from the dining room. I paused in the corridor, just out of sight, straining to listen. "Should we tell him?" said Mrs. Bennet, her voice low and hesitant. "He has the right to know," Mr. Bennet responded. "If it's about him, we can't keep it a secret. It'll just upset him. He's doing so well right now," she told me. I stepped closer. What exactly were they talking about? "We should at least wait until we know more," Mrs. Bennet said. "This letter doesn't explain much. It could be nothing." I leaned against the wall, my heart racing. Is this a letter about me? Before I could figure out how to inquire without sounding like I was eavesdropping, Mr. Bennet groaned. "Fine, we'll wait. But if they contact us again, we have to come clean." I heard footsteps approaching the living room and quickly ducked into the kitchen, claiming I had just walked in. Mrs. Bennet smiled at me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I sneaked into the dining room. I knew I shouldn't spy, but I couldn't stop myself. On the table was a stack of mail, and near the bottom I noticed an envelope with my name on it. I hesitated to pick it up. The return address was from a law firm. As I opened it and read the first few lines, my stomach churned. "To whom it may concern, this is a notice regarding unresolved debts associated with Gregory and Diane. As Noah's guardians, we require all pertinent documents addressing the family's financial status during—" I paused reading, my hands trembling. Debts? Was this what Russell and Diane had been running from? Had they dismissed me not because they couldn't afford me, but because they couldn't accept their own mistakes? I tucked the letter back into the envelope and returned it to the stack, attempting to make it appear that I had not touched it. My thoughts raced. I wasn't sure what to do with this information. But one thing was clear. Russell and Diane had been lying about more than just their financial problems. By the age of 16, things began to make sense. I'd been working hard in school, juggling my job and extracurricular activities, and it was paying off. My grades were strong, and my debate coach told me I had a good chance of receiving a scholarship. That was the first time I allowed myself to picture a future that did not include my parents or their problems. It felt freeing, actually. The scholarship became a reality. I still recall the day I received the letter. I applied on a whim, believing there was little chance I'd get it. When I opened the package and saw the words "full ride," I could not believe it. I dashed downstairs to show the Bennets, who were literally beaming with delight. Mrs. Bennet grabbed me tightly, and Mr. Bennet repeatedly said, "I knew it. I knew you could do it." That night, I decided to post the news on social media. I wasn't usually one to disclose personal information, but this seemed like a time worth celebrating. I wrote something short and sweet about how hard effort pays off and how grateful I was for the help I had received. The remarks started coming in almost immediately. Friends from school, teachers, and even random classmates that I hardly knew. However, there was one comment that made my stomach drop. It came from Diane. "We're so proud of you, Noah. Let's reconnect soon." Proud of myself? After everything? I stared at the comment for what felt like an eternity, my rage rising to the surface again. They didn't just make a comment. It was so casual, as if we were distant relatives who had lost touch, rather than parents who had entirely abandoned their son. I did not respond. What could I possibly say? Instead, I deleted their comments and blocked them both. That's when I understood I didn't need their approval or guilt trips. The scholarship gave me a renewed feeling of purpose. I poured myself even deeper into my studies, determined to prove to myself, and perhaps to them, that I could succeed without their assistance. Mr. Bennet began teaching me little financial literacy lessons, which I found interesting. He showed me how to save, budget, and set long-term goals. It wasn't flashy, but it was practical and offered me a sense of power that I hadn't experienced before. With their support, I began instructing younger pupils after school. It was not something I had ever imagined myself doing, but it turned out I had a talent for describing things in a way that made sense. Plus, it felt wonderful to aid suffering kids, especially since I knew what it was like to be left behind. One day, during one of our tutoring sessions, Marco inquired about my ultimate aim. "Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" he asked, reclining back in his chair as if it were the most simple question in the world. I paused for a second before responding. "I just want to be stable, you know? Like, have my own place, my own life, and not feel like I'm relying on anyone else. That's solid, he remarked, grinning. But don't forget to have some fun along the way. Marco's remarks stayed with me. I realized I had been so focused on proving myself that I had left little room for anything else. So I promised myself I'd find a balance. I kept working hard, but I also began saying yes to things I normally avoided. Game nights with friends, unplanned road vacations, or simply hanging out at the park on a quiet Sunday. It wasn't much, but it reminded me that life doesn't have to be all work and no play. By the end of the year, I felt like a new person. I wasn't simply surviving anymore. I was prospering. The Bennetts had become my rock. Marco was like a brother to me, and it seemed like I was finally on my own road. My parents' absence still hurts, but it didn't define me. If anything, it motivated me to continue moving forward. Then everything changed when my graduation day arrived. It was meant to be the pinnacle of everything I had worked for. It was the day I would finally step up, surrounded by everyone who had supported me, and proclaim I made it. The weeks before graduation were a haze. I had scarcely any time to think. The Bennetts were ecstatic, planning a modest celebration at their home following. Even Marco, who usually dismisses anything mushy, looked genuinely excited for me. I recall the morning of graduation like it was yesterday. My mind raced with memories of everything it had taken to get here. From the minute my parents dropped me off on the Bennett's doorstep to the evenings I spent studying simply to prove to myself I could do it. I thought about everything. Mrs. Bennett had ironed my graduation gown the night before and left it on my bedroom door with a letter that said, "So proud of you, Noah." I grinned when I noticed it. It wasn't just the note. It was everything they'd done for me in the previous 5 years. They were no longer merely foster parents. They were my actual family. The ceremony was just as you'd anticipate. When my name was called, I crossed the stage to receive my diploma. And for a brief minute, it seemed like time had stopped. The crowd was cheering, and I could hear the Bennetts and Marco calling out my name like I was a rock star. It was just what I had hoped for. But of course, nothing in my life remains great for long. Following the ceremony, we gathered outdoors to snap photographs. The Bennetts were grinning, and Marco was cracking foolish comments about how my diploma was probably scribbled in crayons. Lily had even shown up, which surprised me because she normally kept to herself. My world seemed perfect until I saw them. Russell and Diane stood at the fringe of the crowd. At first I assumed my eyes were playing tricks on me. I hadn't seen them in years, and I certainly hadn't invited them. But there they were, dressed like they'd just gotten off a cruise ship, surveying the crowd as if looking for something or someone. I attempted to ignore them, expecting they would leave once they realized I was not going to address them. But Russell caught my eye, and before I could look away, he began marching toward me, bringing Diane along with him. My chest constricted as they approached, their features painted with phony smiles. "Noah," Diane remarked, her tone far too upbeat for someone who had abandoned their child. "You look so grown up." Russell clasped my shoulder as if we were old friends catching up. "We're so proud of you, son. This is such a big day for all of us." All of us. I laughed at the arrogance of that assertion. I stared at them, unsure whether to shout, cry, or walk away. The Bennetts and Marco were standing a few steps away, evidently perplexed, but unwilling to intervene. "What are you doing here?" I questioned, my voice firm despite my quivering palms. "We came to celebrate with you," Russell explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We've made mistakes, Noah, but we always wanted the best for you," Diane added, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "We've missed you so much. We thought this would be the perfect time to reconnect as a family." "You don't get to call yourselves my family," I told you. "You abandoned me, you left me with strangers and didn't even bother to check if I was okay. And now you want to show up like none of that happened." Diane's smile faded, and Russell's face grew red. "That's not fair, Noah," Russell responded calmly. "We did what we thought was best for everyone." "Best for everyone," I countered. "You mean best for you? Don't stand here and act like you did this for me. You were living your dream life while I was trying to figure out how to survive without you." People were starting to take notice. The Bennetts moved closer, their expressions a mix of concern and rage. Lily surprised me the most. She stepped over to Russell and Diane and told them, "You don't get to ruin this for him. You've done enough." It was the first time I'd seen her stand up to them, and I couldn't have been more proud. Russell attempted to protest, but Diane tugged on his sleeve, muttering about generating a scene. They both gave me one more glance, their faces filled with frustration and pity, before turning to walk away. The Bennetts were quick to step in, hugging me and reminding me that today was about my accomplishments, not their turmoil. Marco offered me a tissue and mumbled something about how I should charge them for emotional damages, which made me chuckle. The remainder of the day was a blur. We returned to the Bennetts' house, where they had adorned the backyard with streamers and balloons. And for a few hours, I forgot about Russell and Diane, and simply enjoyed being around those who genuinely cared. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the porch with Lily. She turned to me and said, "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't see it before, but you were right. They manipulated us. They only care about themselves." I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. We sat there silently for a bit. I felt Lily and I were on the same page, and that was plenty. That day wasn't just about graduating. It was about finally standing up for myself and cutting links with those who had attempted to bring me down. It was not easy, but it was necessary. But I knew my folks were not finished yet. Their unexpected contact with me, as well as their insistence on returning to my life after all these years, gave me the impression that something was wrong. And I couldn't be more correct. A week after graduation, Diane sent me an email. At first I assumed it was an apology, but deep inside I knew better. It was lengthy, full of half-truths and justifications. She talked about how difficult things had been for them, how they made mistakes but always had my best interests in mind. She then said to me, "We hope we can move past this and reconnect as a family. You're doing so well and we're proud of you. Maybe you could help us out during this tough time." Help them out. After everything they'd done, or more properly not done, they had the audacity to beg for my assistance. It was humorous in an unfunny sense. I did not respond. I deleted the email and blocked their address, but the rage persisted like an unwelcome visitor. Lily had been keeping an eye on them, more out of curiosity than anything. She updated me on their newest shenanigans. They had spent their funds attempting to maintain the image of their so-called dream life, which they couldn't afford. The travel blog had failed, leaving them with nothing except debt and poor credit. They had sold the majority of their stuff and were couch surfing with distant relatives who, according to Lily, were losing patience with them. "They're a mess," Lily commented one night while on the phone. "But they keep blaming you for everything. They believe that if you simply forgive them, everything would automatically improve." Forgive them? For what? Making me homeless at 12? I snapped, bitterness evident in my voice. Lily sighed. "I am not saying they are correct, Noah. I am only telling you what they are saying." Their downfall was not something I cheered for, but I couldn't say I felt sorry for them either. They'd made their decisions, and now they were coping with the consequences. Meanwhile, my life was progressing. One afternoon, I received a notification on my phone that left me dumbfounded. Russell and Diane had found me on LinkedIn. They'd commented on a post I'd written about my future scholarship, saying, "We're so proud of you, Noah. Let's catch up soon." It was almost identical to the comment they had made on my graduation post. I had no idea they knew how LinkedIn operated. I instantly blocked them, but that wasn't enough. They started messaging people in my network, including co-workers, professors, and the Bennetts. The texts were all the same, a combination of guilt-tripping and plain lies about how I had abandoned them. One of the messages got to my employer at the bookshop, who called me aside one day to inquire what was going on. "Look, I don't want to pry," she explained, "but someone pretending to be your parent sent us an email. It was weird." I felt humiliated. "I'm very sorry," I said. "They are not actually a part of my life. I'll handle it." To her credit, my employer did not press me for information. She simply nodded and added, "Well, if they bother us again, let me know. We have your back." Hearing that was reassuring, but it also showed me how far Russell and Diane were willing to go. They were not only invading my personal life but also attempting to undermine my professional one. Around this time, Lily stepped in, issuing a public statement on social media and calling them out. She didn't hold back, telling us how they abandoned both of us and refused to accept responsibility for their actions. Noah and I have fought hard to rebuild our lives without their help, she wrote. We do not owe them anything. Her post went viral, and hundreds of others commented in support. While it was encouraging to have so many strangers supporting us, it also exacerbated the issue. Russell and Diane began striking out, writing their own dramatic rants about how ungrateful we were and how much they had done for us. Their messages were full of half-truths and plain lies, but as they spoke, more people saw through them. Then Lily called me, her voice strangely enthusiastic. Do you recall the old storage unit they had? It turns out they stopped paying for it, and the landlord allowed me to take a few items before emptying it out. An hour later, she arrived at my house carrying a damaged cardboard box. You need to see this, she replied, dropping it on the table. Inside, I discovered a folder full of documentation, unpaid invoices, foreclosure notifications, and letters from collection agencies. My stomach dropped as I flipped through them. They were living way beyond their means, Lily stated coldly. Failed enterprises and maxed out credit cards. It appears that they fled rather than face the situation. Near the bottom of the stack, a letter from their lawyer drew my attention. It mentioned reforming finances and lowering reliance to cut costs. My name was right there, classified as a liability. I slammed the folder closed, my hands trembling. They didn't leave because they couldn't afford me, I admitted quietly. They left because it was easier than cleaning up their mess. Lily paused for a time before responding. I thought you deserved to know. Thanks, I mumbled. After she departed, I glanced at the folder, torn between destroying it and preserving it as evidence. I ended up keeping it for myself rather than for them. By the time I started college, their reputation had deteriorated. People reported their crowdfunding projects as bogus, and even the family they were residing with had kicked them out. According to Lily, they were living out of their car and still believed I owed them money. Meanwhile, I was thriving. College was all I dreamed for, and I was determined to make the most of my scholarship. I have created a modest side business offering financial literacy classes on campus. It wasn't spectacular, but it felt nice to give back, especially given how much the Bennetts had taught me about money management. One day during my second semester, I received a call from Lily. You're not going to believe this, she replied, her tone alternately frustrated and disbelieving. They showed up at my apartment. What? I asked as my chest tightened. They were crying, Noah begging me to convince you to talk to them. They said they're desperate. I sighed and rubbed my temples. What did you say? I told them to leave. I said if they showed up again, I'd call the police. I wasn't sure whether to be angry or relieved. Part of me resented that they were still attempting to draw Lily into their turmoil. But a part of me was proud of her for staying firm. She had come a long way from the timid girl who avoided confrontation at all costs. I did not owe them my forgiveness, money, or time. I owed myself to continue living the life I want, free of their influence. But of course, Russell and Diane were not finished with me. They were not the type of folks who let go, especially not when they believed there was anything in it for them. It began with strange numbers appearing on my phone at all times of day. I normally ignored them, but one day I made the mistake of responding. It was my Aunt Rachel, a relative I hadn't spoken with in years. She did not waste any time. Noah, what is wrong with you? She demanded before I could even say hello. Excuse me? I asked, caught off guard. Your parents are struggling, living in their car, and you're just ignoring them like they don't exist? They're your family, Noah. You owe them at least a little kindness. I held down the temptation to chuckle. Kindness. Did they treat me kindly when they dropped me off at a foster home and never looked back? Were they kind to me when they left me to fend for myself at 12? Rachel huffed, obviously not expecting me to push back. They were doing what they thought was best. People make mistakes, Noah. You're being heartless. I hung up. I didn't want to waste my time justifying myself to someone who clearly had no understanding of what I'd been through or, worse, didn't care. Over the next few weeks, I received similar calls from distant cousins, the majority of whom had not contacted me in years. It was the same story every time. I was the ungrateful son, the selfish one who couldn't forgive his unfortunate parents. None of them appeared to realize that Russell and Diane weren't only bad parents. They were toxic, manipulative, and reluctant to accept responsibility for their acts. Helping them would just draw me back into the chaos from which I had fought so hard to escape. When the calls failed, Russell and Diane escalated the situation. One day, I received an email from a lawyer representing them. The subject line itself made my stomach turn. Notice of intent to pursue financial support. I opened it and skimmed the legal jargon, which boiled down to the following. They were suing me for financial abandonment. According to the email, they believed I had an obligation to support them now that I had achieved success. It was hilarious. First of all, I was not a millionaire. Sure, I was doing well, but I was still in the beginning stages of my profession. Second, I had been in foster care. Legally, I owed them nothing. I emailed the email to a lawyer the Bennetts had recommended, who told me it was a bogus threat. They don't have a case, she explained. They're trying to scare you into giving them money. Don't engage. It was sound counsel, but it left an unpleasant taste in my mouth. After everything they'd done, the thought of them twisting the story to make me the bad guy stung even more. Instead of stewing about it, I focused my energies on my task. By now, my financial literacy classes had evolved into something far larger. What began as a side venture has grown into a full-fledged organization that teaches young adults around the country how to handle their money and plan for their future. I've worked with nonprofits, schools, and even some well-known enterprises. Every accomplishment felt like a step forward from the person I was before Russell and Diane left me behind. I recently received an email from a producer who learned about my story through one of my nonprofit partners. They were creating a series about resilience and wanted to include me. Initially, I was apprehensive. Did I really want to put my tale out there for everyone to see? But, after discussing it with the Bennetts and Lily, I decided to go for it. If sharing my story might make even one child in foster care feel less alone, it would be worthwhile. The filming procedure was strange. They asked whether I wanted to mention anything about Russell and Diane. I deliberated for a long time before deciding to discuss them briefly, not to shame them, but to provide context for my path. They made their choices, I explained during one of the interviews, and those choices shaped me in ways I never expected. But they don't define me. My life now, the family I've built, the work I do, that's what matters. But during one of the filming breaks, the producer approached me, appearing hesitant. "Hey, Noah," she began. "We found something during our research. It's about your parents. Are you okay hearing it?" I raised an eyebrow. At this point, I'm not sure anything could shock me, but go ahead. She took a big breath before proceeding. They were evicted after defaulting on many loans. There is also a history of delinquent debts, which could lead to potentially fraudulent claims. It looks like they skipped town to avoid legal trouble. I stared at her. Fraud allegations. The words seemed heavy, as if they were sinking in slow motion. She nodded. It wasn't anything huge, at least not on the surface. But there was a pattern of failed business ideas, questionable credit card usage, and attempts to obtain loans they couldn't afford. They left many people hanging. The fury I thought I had buried resurfaced. So they weren't simply greedy. They were intentionally defrauding people and fleeing when the consequences became apparent. The producer offered me a compassionate glance. "It appears that way. I felt you should know in case it came up again." I nodded, even though my thoughts were racing. Their lies had always seemed personal, as if they were solely about me. But knowing they had left a trail of ruin made things worse. Everything about them proved what I'd believed all along. They abandoned me because it was convenient, a way to cut their losses and start again. However, when the documentary was released, the response was enormous. Messages came in from people who had grown up in similar situations, thanking me for telling my tale. Some claimed it gave them hope. Others simply claimed it made them feel seen. It was unexpectedly humiliating. Russell and Diane attempted to take advantage of the documentary, as one could expect. They went on social media and posted big, dramatic rants about how I had portrayed them as villains when they were the true victims. It did not work. If anything, it backfired. People who watched the documentary began calling them out, pointing out flaws in their tales and questioning their motivations. Their efforts to recover compassion merely reinforced their reputation as manipulative and selfish. Meanwhile, I purchased my first home, a modest space in a quiet area where I could finally feel like I belonged. I invited the Bennetts and Lily over for a housewarming meal, and we spent the evening laughing, eating too much, and reflecting on how far we had come. Lily had also been prospering. She had graduated from college and was embarking on her own career, free of Russell and Diane's influence. To be honest, I have no regrets about the decisions I took. Cutting ties with Russell and Diane was difficult, but it was necessary. My success was thanks to the Bennetts, Lily, and the family I formed. Not blood, but the people that turned up. And that is all that matters. At the end of the day, family is not defined by blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, and who encourages you to be the best version of yourself. And the family I chose exceeded all of my expectations. My family took a $3,000 vacation without me, then assumed I'd watch their kids for free. I left at 5 a.m., and they called CPS when they found out. I'm Riley, 22 years old, and I recently graduated from college with a finance degree. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to graduate from high school, attend a decent college, find a nice job, and move out. It seems simple enough, right? However, life had other plans. I graduated, obtained my degree, and then returned to my parents' home in a little Ohio town. Do not get me wrong, I adore my parents, Denise and Russell. They are wonderful people who have worked hard to establish a stable environment for me and my sister Morgan. But going home wasn't exactly the dream I'd been chasing for 4 years. The plan was to stay with them for a few months while I sought work and saved up enough money to buy my own home. It seemed reasonable. No rent, free food, and a chance to regroup while I plotted my next steps. I told myself that it was a sensible option even though it stung my pride a little. Initially, everything went well. Within a week, I was employed as an analyst at Western Group, a mid-sized corporation that specializes in financial planning for small businesses. The pay was not high, but it was consistent and the benefits were decent. That evening, I came home feeling as if I had taken my first important step toward independence. Mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and Dad was watching television in the living room. I grabbed a plate of food, sat down at the table, and presented the news. I got the job, I said, delighted. I start Monday. For a moment, I thought they'd be excited. I was anticipating some congratulations, maybe even a, "we're proud of you." Instead, they exchanged that look that parents give when they're about to say something terrible. Mom lowered her fork and smiled tightly. "That's great, Riley, really. We knew you'd find something quickly." But Dad chimed in. "We've been meaning to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. This wasn't going to be good. Mom sighed and folded her hands on the table. "With my arthritis getting worse, I've had to cut back my hours at the library. And your dad's hours at the auto shop have been reduced. They're talking about more layoffs too." I inquired, knowing exactly where this was going. "And we could use some help with the bills," Mom said, apologizing. "Just until things stabilize. You wouldn't have to pay rent or anything, it's just the utilities and groceries have been harder to manage." I sat there staring at my plate. When I returned, I decided to contribute here and there to support my own expenses. But that was more than I expected. Nonetheless, they were my parents. They had always been supportive and they were not asking for much. "Yeah, of course," I said, pretending to smile. "It's the least I can do." Looking back, that was the moment when I should have set boundaries. But guilt is a strong emotion. Over the next 6 months, things settled into a pattern. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and crash. Every month, I sent my parents a sizable amount of my wages to pay bills, groceries, and other costs. On top of that, I took on minor tasks they claimed they didn't have time for, like running errands for Mom when her arthritis flared up or correcting Dad's Excel sheets because he wasn't a computer person. It was not just about money. I had not anticipated having to provide time, energy, or patience. At first, I convinced myself that it was only temporary, a tiny gesture to my parents who had always been there for me. However, as time went, I started to notice minor nuances. If I mentioned wanting to save for my own place, Mom would sigh deeply and say, "It must be nice to think about moving out when the rest of us are struggling to get by." Dad was no different. He'd shake his head and say, "Some people have no idea how hard it is to make ends meet." Whenever I spent money on myself, such as when I bought new work clothes, it wasn't just the guilty feeling, it was a total lack of appreciation for everything I had given up. My friends stopped inviting me out because I couldn't afford to attend. My desire to see the metropolis faded with each month as my savings account refused to grow. When I told Mom that I was considering having a second job to help save money faster, her only response was, "Well, just don't let it interfere with what we need." That stung. What we need. I was giving everything I had to keep this household together, but it wasn't enough. But I didn't believe it was very malicious. They weren't nasty or demanding. But the guilt trips were subtle and constant, like pouring water over a rock. Meanwhile, I began to feel stuck. I had planned to stay for 3 to 6 months at most, but the more I assisted them, the more they appeared to rely on me. The bills continued coming in, and I kept paying them, all while my ideal of freedom receded further away. Still, I told myself it was only temporary. I just needed to save a little more, and I'd be done. I even started looking at city apartments, thinking what it would be like to have my own place. However, before I could take the next step, life threw me another curveball. It was a Friday evening in late spring. I'd just gotten home from work and was looking forward to a peaceful night of Netflix and leftovers. Mom was in the kitchen, and Dad was outside tinkering with the mower. Everything seemed normal until the doorbell rang. I answered the door to see my older sister Morgan standing there looking agitated. Travis, her husband, was behind her holding a bag. Their 2 children, Ava, 5, and Milo, 3, ran around the yard like sugar-fueled tornadoes. "Surprise," Morgan said, flashing a large fake smile. I stood there for a second, unsure what to say. Travis, behind her, looked tired as he carried suitcases and a duffel bag. "What's going on?" I eventually asked, stepping aside as Morgan marched past me like she owned the place. "We need a place to stay for a little while," she said, already walking toward the living room. She plopped down on the couch and groaned deeply. "Travis's consultant role has ended, and my boutique's sales have decreased, making it tough to pay the rent. You understand how things are, except that I didn't. I had no idea you allowed things to become so bad that you packed up your entire family and showed up unannounced in someone else's home." Travis ultimately passed through the door with his arms full. "Hey, Riley," he said softly, barely making eye contact before moving the stuff upstairs. I was still standing there, unmoving, when Mom entered from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, my babies are here," she exclaimed, clutching Morgan in a hug. "You poor things. You've been through so much. Don't you worry. We'll take care of everything." Dad entered a minute later, holding Milo in one arm like a football. "This one nearly gave me a heart attack," he explained as he sat down, running straight for the mower like it's a ride at an amusement park. Morgan chuckled faintly, but I noticed she didn't apologize or even look at Milo to tell him to stop. I stood there, watching the scene develop as if I were in a different universe. Within minutes, my parents were praising Morgan like she was a military hero who had survived a major fight. Mom was already talking about supper and where they could place the kids' beds, and Dad offered to move his tools out of the spare room to create more space. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible. That night I sat in my room, trying to focus on a budget spreadsheet for work, but all I could hear was chaos downstairs. Ava and Milo ran up and down the corridor, yelling at the top of their lungs. Morgan's voice boomed around the living room as she told Mom about her recent business issues. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that it would only be a few weeks. That should be manageable for me. The next morning it was clear Morgan and Travis were not leaving anytime soon. They unloaded all of the bags, filled the spare room closet, and even took over a cabinet shelf for the children's food. And without saying anything overtly, I was picked as the babysitter. It started little. Morgan would casually ask me to keep an eye on Ava and Milo while she and Travis ran to the store. "It'll just be an hour," she'd say, grabbing for her purse. However, that hour generally lasted 2 or 3. Weekends were the worst. On Saturday mornings, I'd wake up hoping to rest and catch up on some reading or Netflix, only to find Morgan and Travis dressed to go out. Morgan would announce, "We're meeting friends for brunch," and hand me a list of kid-friendly activities she'd printed from the internet. We shouldn't be too long. By not too long, she meant the most of the day. Morgan acted as if I had just suggested dumping the kids in a ditch when I tried to push back the first time. "Riley, it's just brunch. You don't even have plans. What's the big deal?" "I was planning to spend the day catching up on work," I said, pointing to my laptop. Morgan rolled her eyes. "You're just sitting there on your computer anyway. Can't you do that with Ava and Milo in the room? You're being so dramatic." The worst moment was when Mom jumped in. "Riley, honey," she said, lowering her voice as if to convey some old wisdom. "Morgan works so hard, and she deserves a little break now and then." "I work hard too," I said, but Mom just waved me off. "Of course you do. But you're single, sweetie. You don't understand how much pressure comes with having a family to take care of." It was as if my own problems were irrelevant because I didn't have a husband or children to worry about. No matter what I said, it was always about how much tougher everyone else had it. Setting boundaries would be selfish of me. If I begged for some space, I was making it all about myself. And when Morgan and Travis returned from their never-ending brunches or errands, they'd behave like they'd just run a marathon. "You don't know what it's like out there," Travis once said, sagging into the couch as if he'd spent the day digging trenches instead of sipping mimosas. I wanted to shout, "I don't know what it's like?" I had just spent 6 hours stopping Milo from eating Play-Doh while Ava asked for a snack every 5 minutes. Of course, bringing it up would be overly whining. I spent my Saturdays watching Bluey and trying to keep Milo from throwing blocks at me, while Ava demanded snacks every 5 minutes. Mom and Dad conveniently left during these extended babysitting sessions, claiming they needed to do errands or complete garage tasks. When I told Morgan later, she rolled her eyes. "Riley, they're just kids. It's not that hard. Not too difficult." It was simple for her to say when she wasn't scrubbing crayon smears off the walls or explaining why eating Play-Doh is a bad idea. The worst part was that few people seemed to appreciate what I was doing. Morgan acted as if I was being dramatic anytime I mentioned it. Travis rarely spoke to me unless he needed something. And Mom and Dad seemed to think everything was just normal. "You're such a big help," Mom said one evening after I mentioned how fatigued I was. "It's good practice for when you have kids someday." The constant guilt trips were starting to wear me down. Every time I pondered saying no or setting stronger limits, I remembered Mom's words. Family helps family. So, what about me? Didn't I deserve to live my own life? It wasn't just babysitting either. My salary, which had previously been enough to support the costs of 3 people, was now stretched thin with 5 more mouths to feed. The cost of groceries and utilities doubled overnight. I attempted to bring it up one evening after dinner. "Hey Morgan, would you and Travis be able to chip in for groceries this week?" She looked at me as if I had asked her to donate her kidney. "We're barely scraping by as it is, Riley, you know that." Travis nodded attentively. "It's tough out there right now." I bit my tongue and let it go, but inside I was enraged. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home. My bedroom became the only place I could hide, but even that wasn't safe. Ava and Milo had fun breaking in unexpectedly and dumping toys and crumbs everywhere. Everyone but me realized this was not a temporary scenario. Morgan and Travis were becoming overly comfortable, and I was paying the price both financially and emotionally. I should have spoken up earlier, but every time I did, I felt like the bad guy. I was repeatedly told that I was overreacting or being selfish, so I remained silent. Then one evening, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but living in a house with individuals who don't grasp the notion of an indoor voice makes it impossible not to overhear conversations. I was sitting in my room one evening, scrolling through job postings to distract myself from the chaos downstairs, when I heard the end of Mom's phone call. "Yes, we're all going to Florida next weekend for Celesta's retirement celebration. It'll be so nice to have the whole family together for a proper send-off," she said with a grin. I froze. Florida, retirement celebrations, whole family. I stood up and moved into the hallway, craning my neck to see whether I had misheard. Mom was still on the phone and pacing in the kitchen, her back to me. Of course Riley will be here to watch the kids, it just makes sense. No point in dragging them along to something they wouldn't enjoy. Ah, there it was. Except for myself, the whole family would go to Florida. Apparently I had already offered to stay behind and babysit. I went back to my room thinking, how could they just forget me? The more I thought about it, the angrier I grew. Not only was I not informed about the trip, but they did not even contemplate including me. I was not invited, was not asked if I could babysit, and was not given any previous notice. They just assumed. Because it is what my family did. The ensuing days were filled with frustration and awkward silence. Morgan was busy shopping for vacation clothes, flaunting her new swimsuit and flip-flops around the house, while Ava and Milo were making havoc in the living room. Travis spoke constantly about how much he was looking forward to relaxing on the beach. Mom, meantime, was in full planning mode, making vacation arrangements and double-checking her packing list. Dad, of course, agreed with everything she said, nodding when necessary but adding little more than an occasional grunt of agreement. Nobody addressed the fact that I was not going. I tried to bring it up gently during dinner one night. So when were you all planning to tell me about Florida? I asked, stabbing at my salad. Mom glanced at me with amazement. Oh, I thought Morgan told you. Morgan didn't even look up from her plate. I assumed you knew. Mom's been talking about it for weeks. For weeks. I wanted to shout. Weeks passed, and no one thought to speak to me. So what's the plan? I asked, attempting to appear calm. You all head to Florida and I just stay here with the kids? Well, yes, Mom responded matter-of-factly. It just makes the most sense. The kids wouldn't enjoy a retirement party, and someone needs to stay behind to look after them. You're so good with Ava and Milo, and it's not like you'd want to come anyway. That last part stung. Why wouldn't I want to come? I asked, trying to maintain a calm tone. Morgan gradually looked up, her expression somewhere between pity and irritation. It's a family trip, Riley. Adults only. You wouldn't even know anyone there besides Aunt Celeste. And it's not like you're close to her. Dad chimed in, trying to calm things down. We just figured this was the best arrangement for everyone. You'll have the house to yourself for a few days. Peace and quiet. Was he serious? How relaxing would it be to follow two hyperactive kids all weekend while the rest of the family sipped margaritas on the beach? After that, I ended the conversation. It was clear that they had already made up their minds, and nothing I said would change that. As the days passed, I began to feel like an outsider in my own family. The enthusiasm in the house was palpable. Morgan and Mom were continuously talking about clothes, plans, and which restaurants they would visit in Florida. Travis, who rarely displayed emotion beyond mild rage, appears to be really excited about the trip. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible. However, the pattern was not exclusive to the Florida vacation. Morgan was always the center of attention when we were kids. She was the cheerleading captain, and her accomplishments were recognized with balloons and banners. I was the nerdy one. But it didn't matter because Morgan's trophies adorned the shelves and her face was prominently displayed in every family photo. Years later, nothing has changed. Morgan was still the golden child, and I was still the afterthought, the person they called when they needed something, the one they relied on but never fully appreciated. I tried to distract myself by focusing on work, but it was hard to concentrate with Ava and Milo constantly barging into my room or shrieking at each other about toys. Morgan's parenting method appears to involve handing the kids an iPad and letting them run wild. Travis wasn't doing much better. He'd sit on the couch and check his phone as chaos erupted around him. But things started to shift one afternoon when I overheard Morgan talking to Mom in the kitchen. It's just so nice to have Riley around, she shared with me. I don't know what we'd do without her taking care of the kids. She's like the glue holding everything together. This is exactly what I did to them. Not a person with my own life and goals, but rather the glue that holds theirs together. That's when I understood I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't continue to sacrifice my happiness and freedom for a family that took me for granted. I spent the rest of the week preparing my escape. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. If they could arrange a trip without informing me, I could plan my own. I attempted to think of where I'd go. Then I remembered that one of my undergrad friends, Brooke, had mentioned going camping that weekend. She and a few others were heading to Blue Ridge Falls, and she had invited me to accompany them. I denied her request since I figured I'd be stuck at home babysitting. But suddenly it felt like a terrific opportunity. I texted Brooke that night. "Is there still room on the trip this weekend?" Her reply arrived almost instantly. "Of course. We're leaving early Saturday morning. You in?" I looked at my phone for a moment before responding. "I'm in." The decision seemed liberating. I was finally putting myself first, and this was no ordinary camping trip. It was a lifeline, a chance to get out of the house and away from the chaos that has consumed my life. However, it would be tough to carry out. My family had a knack for sniffing out anything that didn't revolve around them, and if they discovered I was planning something for me, it was over before it even began. I had to be wise about this. The days leading up to Saturday were tense. Morgan was in full holiday mode, parading about the house with new beach hats and a playlist she insisted on blasting at high level. Travis spent the majority of his time tinkering with the children's car seats and complaining about how much luggage they needed to put into the trunk. Meanwhile, Mom rushed around with a clipboard, double-checking the packing list. "Riley, don't forget Ava likes her milk warmed before bed," she said, as if I hadn't heard it 3 times before. "Oh, and Milo's picky about his pajamas. Make sure he's in the blue ones." I nodded, biting my tongue to prevent saying something I could regret. There was no point in disputing. I had already volunteered to be the weekend babysitter, and nothing I said would change their minds. By Friday night, the house looked like a zoo. Mom and Morgan were deciding which foods to bring. Travis was attempting to mend a squeaky luggage wheel as the children ran around the living room like miniature hurricanes. Dad, as usual, had gone to the garage to check on the tools, which I assumed was code for fleeing the commotion. I watched it all from the kitchen, silently drinking my tea and counting down the hours till morning. Around 10 p.m., everything started to calm down. Mom put the kids to bed, Morgan went upstairs to pack her last few needs, and Travis laid down on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I waited until the house was completely silent before entering my room and grabbed my duffel bag. I'd been packing slowly all week to avoid suspicion, putting my hiking boots and clothes at the back of my wardrobe. I carefully packed my toothbrush, flashlight, and a few snacks before sealing it. My heart was racing with anticipation rather than dread. This was not just about camping. It was about restoring control of my life. My alarm rang at 5 a.m., sharp. I got out of bed, grabbed my duffel bag, and tiptoed to the door. The house was extraordinarily quiet, the type of quietness that only occurs in the early hours of the morning. I held my breath as I opened the front door, cringing as it creaked more than expected. I froze for a second, waiting for someone to call after me, but nothing occurred. The air outside was cool and refreshing. I took one last look at the darkened house before getting into my car and started it. As I backed out of the driveway, I felt a sense of relaxation. I was free. The journey to Blue Ridge Falls was both peaceful and pleasant. The farther I traveled from home, the lighter I felt. I turned on the radio and relaxed for the first time in what seemed like months. Although I kept thinking how my family would react when they got up, I tried to distract myself and focus exclusively on myself. Brooke had texted me the camping location, and when I arrived, the sun had fully risen. She was already there, unloading her car and setting up her tent. "Hey, you made it!" she exclaimed, waving as I parked beside her. "Of course," I responded. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The campsite was just secluded enough to feel like a real escape, but not so far away that we couldn't find a good route or two. Brooke introduced me to the remainder of the group, which included her college classmates and co-workers. Everyone seemed comfortable and nice, with few questions. We spent the morning erecting tents, gathering firewood, and determining which paths to explore. By midday, we were deep in the woods. It was unusual to be surrounded by nature instead of screaming children and constant requests. Brooke and I settled into a relaxed rhythm, discussing work, life, and everything in between. She didn't inquire about my family, and I didn't respond. This excursion wasn't about them. It was about me. That evening we gathered around the campfire to eat marshmallows and tell stories. "This is exactly what I needed," I said, relaxing on my camp chair and enjoying the warmth of the fire. "Same," Brooke replied, adding another log to the fire. "We should do this more often. Just get away from everything, you know." I nodded and stared at the flames. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely calm. Nobody begged me for favors. Nobody was guilt-tripping me. No one asked me to sacrifice my time and energy for their benefit. As the night went, I found myself laughing harder than I had in ages. It wasn't just the jokes or anecdotes. It was the feeling of being surrounded by people who didn't demand anything from me. During this time, I did not check my phone once. When we returned to the campsite that evening from our journey, I was fatigued in the greatest way possible. My legs hurt, my face was sunburned, and my heart felt lighter than it has in months. I was no longer concerned about my family's expectations or regular demands. I was contemplating what I wanted, where I was going, and how I would get there. That is, until I opened the front door. The house was a mess. Toy dinosaurs, crayons, and what looked to be an empty cereal bag were all sprawled out across the couch. The faint smell of something burning lingered in the air, and I could hear voices coming from the living room. "Riley's here," Mom replied, her voice not as warm as usual. It seemed sharp, like if she were about to unleash something on me. I left my duffel bag at the door and entered the living room. Mom, Morgan, Travis, and Dad were sitting together, their faces flushed with wrath. Ava was screaming aloud, and Milo was curled up on the floor, holding a juice box. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's going on?" Morgan said, standing up and pointing at me. "You disappeared without telling anyone. That's what's going on." "I told you I wasn't babysitting this weekend," I replied, crossing my arms. "You didn't tell us where you were going or what the hell you were doing," Mom screamed, flushing. "I'm an adult, I don't need to check in," I said, my patience fraying. "Well, when we realized you weren't here with the kids, we panicked," Travis had told us. Panic was not even close to describing it. They said they were shocked when they discovered I wasn't at home on Saturday morning. My car was gone, my room was empty, and I had left no notes. Instead of assuming I had gone somewhere or taken a much-needed break, they immediately went to the worst-case scenario. "We thought something had happened to you," Mom said, her voice quivering. "We even called CPS." That stopped me in my tracks. "You called CPS? For what?" "For abandoning the kids," Morgan cried, as if it were the most obvious thing on the planet. "First of all," I replied, waving my hand to interrupt her, "I never agreed to watch your kids this weekend. You all decided that on your own, without consulting me. Second, calling CPS on me for not being here is insane. What exactly did you tell them?" "Hi, we wanted to abandon our own kids with someone who didn't agree to it, but now she's not home, so please arrest her." "Did they laugh before or after they hung up on you?" "That's insane." "It wasn't insane when we didn't know where you were," Mom exclaimed. "I couldn't take their foolishness anymore." "So what happened when CPS showed up?" "They left after we explained everything," Morgan said softly. "But do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" "Embarrassing?" I questioned, my voice rising. "You called CPS because I didn't stick around to babysit your kids and you're worried about embarrassment?" The argument escalated from there. Morgan accused me of being selfish and irresponsible. Travis mentioned something about how I had let everyone down. Mom continued mentioning how I had abandoned my family. Dad, of course, sat there shaking his head in disappointment, as he frequently did when things did not go as planned. By the time the yelling ended, I was too tired to fight. I took my duffel bag and went upstairs to my room, closing the door behind me. The chaos remained until Monday. I left for work early, not wanting to deal with any more guilt trips or accusations. However, my phone was already inundated with texts. "Mom, we need to talk about your behavior this weekend." Morgan, "Riley, you totally screwed us over." Travis, "You owe the family an apology." I disregarded them all. At work, I tried to focus, but the stress of the weekend hovered over me. My coworkers could tell something was wrong. But I wasn't about to unload my family drama in the midst of the break room. By the time I got home that evening, I was ready for round 2. Mom was waiting for me in the kitchen from the time I entered. "We need to talk," she said, folding her arms. "I'm tired," I told her, attempting to walk by. "Riley," she said firmly, pushing in front of me. "This can't wait." I grimaced and set my luggage down. "What now?" Mom's face softened, but her voice remained severe. "Your sister is hurt. She feels like you abandoned her when she needed you most." I looked at her, bewildered. She needed me for what? To babysit her kids while she went on vacation? That's not my responsibility, Mom. "You should do your part as a member of this family," she said, her voice full of anguish. "Funny how that only applies to me," I commented. "When has Morgan ever helped me? When has anyone helped me?" Mom opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. "Exactly," I replied, gathering my suitcase and heading upstairs. The next few days were tense. Morgan hardly spoke to me, and when she did, she only made passive-aggressive comments about how difficult it is to find good babysitters these days. Travis stayed out of it, which was probably a good thing. But his silence was nearly as unpleasant as the arguing. Mom and Dad tried to act as if nothing had happened, but each conversation was loaded with regret. "We're a family," Mom would say at random, as if that was enough to solve everything. I realized I couldn't remain much longer. The house felt more oppressive than ever, and no amount of space or time could improve the situation. One evening, when I was folding laundry, Dad knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone quieter than usual. "Sure," I said, even though I was not in the mood for another lecture. He stepped in and sat on the edge of my bed, staring down at his hands. "Look, I know things have been tough lately, and I know you feel like we've been unfair to you." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "But your mom and I are just trying to keep everyone together," I was told. "This family's been through a lot, and we're all trying to do our best." "Dad, I understand," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But I can't keep sacrificing my life for everyone else. I'm 22. I should be building my future, not cleaning up after Morgan and Travis." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't quite understand. "We'll figure this out," he said after a long pause. "Just give it some time." I nodded, but I knew deep down that time would not make this better. By the end of the week, I had made a decision. It was time to leave. The house no longer felt like a home, but more like a war. I knew if I stayed too long, I'd lose what little sanity I had left. I began searching for apartments. After months of paying bills that weren't mine, my savings were small, but they were enough to get me started. I found a handful of listings that looked promising. Nothing extraordinary, just clean and tiny. I looked at my phone for a moment before phoning Aunt Celeste. She picked up on the second ring. "Riley, how are you, sweetheart?" she inquired, her tone warm and sympathetic. "Hey, Aunt Celeste. I'm okay, I guess," I responded, unsure how to start this conversation. She recognized my hesitant tone right away. "What's going on? Is everything all right?" "Not really," I admitted. "I don't know if you heard, but I didn't go to your retirement trip." "I noticed," she said. "Your mom said you were staying behind to help with the kids. I thought that sounded odd. Why didn't you come?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Because no one told me about it. They just assumed I'd babysit like always." Aunt Celeste remained silent for a moment before drawing a rapid breath. "That doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Your mom mentioned how much you've been helping out, but it sounds like they've been taking advantage of you." "Yeah, you could say that," I answered. "I'm actually thinking about moving out, but I'm not sure how to handle the fallout." "Well, sweetheart, you've done more than enough. You're young. You shouldn't be tied down like this. Move out, set boundaries, and let them figure out their own mess. It's not your responsibility to fix everything for them." Hearing those words felt like a weight was lifted off my chest. She added forcefully, "And if you need help, let me know. You deserve better than this." That conversation gave me the motivation I needed. The following morning, I informed the landlord that I would no longer be paying rent starting next month and that my parents would have to take over. I hesitated to take this step, but I knew it was necessary. After that, I spent the day packing. I didn't bother alerting anyone, and there was no use in starting another dispute until I was ready to depart. I packed all I could put into my car, and the rest could wait. That evening, I arrived downstairs for dinner, ready to drop the bomb. The tension was already high. Morgan had rarely spoken to me this week, and Mom had loomed like a dark cloud. "Can we talk?" I asked, putting down my fork. Mom looked up, wary. "What is it, Riley?" I stated plainly, "I am moving out." The silence was horrible. Morgan's fork clattered on her plate, and Mom's jaw dropped. Even Dad was surprised, but he quickly hid it with his usual grin. "You're what?" Mom asked, her voice shaking. "I'm moving out," I repeated again. "I've already found a place, and I'll be leaving by the end of the weekend." "But you can't just leave," Mom said, her voice rising. "We need you here, the bills, the kids." "It is not my responsibility," I explained. "I've been paying for this house, babysitting Morgan's kids, and putting my life on hold for months. It's time for me to live my own life." Morgan scoffed. "Wow. So you're just going to abandon us? How selfish can you be?" I turned to her, my patience worn out. "Selfish? Morgan, you've been living here rent-free, dumping your kids on me every chance you get, and contributing absolutely nothing. If anyone's selfish, it's you." "That's enough, Riley," Dad said sternly. "No, it's not enough," I replied. "I've done everything you've asked and more, and all I've gotten in return is guilt trips and disrespect. I'm done." Mom's face crumpled, but I did not let it bother me. "I've already told the landlord I won't be contributing to the rent anymore," I said. "So you'll need to figure that out too." Morgan appeared to be about to erupt. "Are you kidding me? You're just going to leave us with all the bills? How are we supposed to manage without you?" "Not my problem," I said, echoing her own words from months before. The next morning, I packed the rest of my belongings into my car. Mom stood on the porch looking sad but saying nothing. Dad stayed inside, avoiding the entire scene. Morgan did not even bother to come downstairs. As I pulled out of the driveway, I had a variety of emotions, but overall, I felt liberated. The first few days in my new flat felt surreal. Mom called several times, but I did not respond. I wasn't prepared to deal with her yet. Morgan wrote me several angry SMS accusing me of abandoning the family, so I disabled her phone number. Aunt Celeste called to check in. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," she said. "It's not easy to stand up for yourself, especially with family, but you did the right thing." "Thanks, Aunt Celeste," I said, smiling. "I think so too." It's been a few months, and things are starting to feel normal. I've reunited with old friends, started new interests, and even begun saving for a trip to Europe next year. I have kept a distance from my relatives. Mom still sends me the occasional guilt-inducing text, but I've stopped letting it bother me. Morgan and I have not communicated since I left, and I am fine with that. I understand they need to change, but it is no longer my responsibility. And I've spent enough of my life putting them first. It is time to prioritize myself for a change. And you know what? I don't regret it. My sister lied about her son's brain surgery to ruin my $8,000 honeymoon, so I called CPS after finding him alone for 3 days starving on cereal. My sister left my toddler nephew home alone for 3 days while partying in Vegas, then faked his urgent medical emergency to trick me into canceling my honeymoon so I could rush home and babysit him. When I filed charges, she hired her lawyer brother to paint me as an unstable kidnapper in court. So I destroyed her life in every way imaginable. My sister Sierra had always talked about being the cool mom growing up. She'd constantly say her kids would be her best friends, how she'd never be uptight like other parents. So when Eli was born, I expected her to be obsessed. And for a while, she always bought new storybooks, took dozens of pictures of him, and spent hours memorizing dinosaur names. But on his 4th birthday, Sierra got him the worst birthday gift of all time. She abandoned him. I still remember her calling me in tears, telling me she just wanted to drop him off at the fire station and let the universe deal with him, and instead of yelling at her or telling her she was a bad person, I asked if she wanted me to babysit more often. You see, Sierra was a single mom who had just gotten out of her postpartum depression, so I figured that if I just helped more, then everything would be okay. And for a while, it was. I started with 1 weekend a month, then once a week, then almost every single evening. Eli was like the son I never had. Fast forward to last month, Sierra asked if I could watch Eli while she went to Vegas for a bachelorette party. But here's the kicker: Caleb, my husband of 2 years, had planned for our honeymoon to be during that time. 2 years married, 2 years saving every penny. Plus, I had given Sierra 4 months' notice. So I said no. To my surprise, she didn't even seem mad, just laughed it off like she realized she was in the wrong and said she'd find someone else. I should have known Sierra would never be so quick to admit she had made a mistake. I was fast asleep at 3 a.m. when my phone vibrated so hard it almost fell off my table. When I saw Sierra's name, I answered immediately. She was literally crying her eyes out and couldn't form proper sentences. She said I needed to come back right now because her son Eli had been hurt. That's all I needed to hear to start packing my bags. But then Sierra continued Eli had been hit by a drunk driver and they had to airlift him to perform open brain surgery at the children's hospital. And obviously, Sierra needed me. Everything happened in a blur. We packed through tears, begged airlines for emergency seats, watched $8,000 in non-refundable bookings vanish. On the flight, I tried to get in contact with Sierra, but she was ghosting me with no text, no call, nothing. As soon as me and Caleb landed in JFK Airport, I called the children's hospital to see if Eli had been admitted. The nurse told me she wasn't seeing any pediatric trauma patients by that name. Adrenaline filled my veins. We called 6 hospitals. Sierra's phone was still going straight to voicemail, so we did what any responsible adult would do in that situation. We broke into her home using the spare key under her mat, except the door was already unlocked. And when I walked in, I expected to see Eli lying in bed with Sierra standing over him. But no. We found him sitting on the couch, playing on his tablet, surrounded by empty cereal bowls, completely uninjured. As soon as he saw us, he wrapped his arms around my waist and practically started cheering, "Yay, hello." I peeled him off of me and gently asked where his mommy was. She left 3 days ago. She told me she couldn't afford a babysitter, but that you would be back from your vacation soon to take care of me. So you didn't get into any accidents or injuries? Caleb asked, trying to wrap his head around everything. Number, why would I be hurt? I can take care of myself, Eli responded, joyful as ever. My blood went cold. I called Sierra from her landline, and this time, she picked up. The first thing I heard was the song California Girls blaring in the background. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, slurring her words together. "What the FIS going on, Sierra?" "What do you mean?" she asked, as if playing dumb would work in the situation. "You told me Eli was in surgery." I was then interrupted by the sound of Sierra cackling like a witch. "Ha ha ha ha, I knew if I lied then you wouldn't come back. You were being super extra about your honeymoon. Must be nice having money to throw around while single moms struggle." Behind me, Eli asked in a small voice if he could live with us. He said Mom didn't want him anymore. Sierra must have heard him through the phone because her tone shifted, instantly venomous and cruel. She accused me of turning her son against her and said this had been my plan all along. That's when I finally realized Sierra wasn't some misunderstood single mother. She was a washed-up, irresponsible, self-absorbed sociopath. And I was ready to make her pay. I hung up on her mid-rant. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. Caleb was already in the kitchen making Eli a proper meal. The kid had been living on cereal for 3 days. 3 whole days. Alone. He was 4 years old. I sat down next to Eli and tried to keep my voice calm. I asked him if he'd been scared. He shrugged and said Mommy told him he was a big boy and said she'd done it before when I was busy. My stomach dropped. This wasn't the first time. I pulled out my phone and called child services right there. The lady on the other end sounded tired, like she'd heard it all before. She took down all the information and said someone would come by tomorrow. Tomorrow wasn't good enough for me. I told her a 4-year-old had been abandoned for 3 days. She said since he had food and shelter, it needed to go through proper channels, but assured me they'd prioritize the case. I wanted to scream. Caleb finished making mac and cheese and brought it over. Eli ate like he hadn't seen real food in days. Between bites, he told us about how he'd been too scared to go outside, how he'd run out of milk on day 2, how he tried calling me but didn't know my number by heart. Each detail made me angrier. After dinner, we gave him a bath and put him in our guest room. He fell asleep clutching my hand. Caleb and I stayed up all night discussing what to do. We couldn't just leave him here when Sierra got back, but we also couldn't legally take him. We were stuck. The next morning, a social worker named Ramona showed up. She was maybe 50, wearing a wrinkled blazer and carrying a clipboard. She interviewed Eli, gently asking about his time alone. He told her everything he told us. She took notes and photos of the empty fridge and the mess. Then she pulled me aside. She said they'd open a case but warned me these things take time. Sierra would get a chance to explain herself. The system favored keeping families together. I told her that was bullpoop. She just shrugged and said that's how it works. 2 days passed. Eli stayed with us and we fell into a routine. Breakfast, cartoons, lunch at the park, afternoon nap, dinner, bath, bed. It felt natural. Right. Caleb was amazing with him reading stories and teaching him card games. On the 3rd day, Sierra showed up at our door. She looked like hell, hair greasy, makeup smeared, reeking of alcohol and cigarettes. She demanded Eli back immediately. I stood in the doorway and told her no. She tried to push past me, but Caleb stepped up behind me. Sierra started screaming about her rights as a mother said we were kidnapping her son. The neighbors came out to watch. I stayed calm and told her to leave or I'd call the cops. She laughed and said, "Go ahead," said she'd already called them herself. Sure enough, 10 minutes later a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers got out looking bored. Sierra ran up to them crying, saying we'd stolen her baby. The officers separated us to get both sides. I explained everything. The abandonment, the lies about the accident, the 3 days alone. I showed them my phone records, the calls to hospitals. They nodded and took notes. Then they went inside to talk to Eli. He was coloring at the kitchen table when they asked if he wanted to go home with Mommy. He shook his head hard, said he wanted to stay with Aunt Claire and Uncle Caleb, said Mommy left him alone and he was scared. The officers exchanged looks. They came back outside and told Sierra she needed to leave. Said this was a civil matter now, not criminal. Told her to work it out with child services. She lost it completely and started screaming that I'd brainwashed him, that I'd always been jealous of her, that I couldn't have kids so I was stealing hers. The officers warned her to calm down. She didn't. They ended up putting her in the back of the patrol car to cool off. Before they drove away, one officer pulled me aside. He said to document everything, take pictures, save texts, record calls if legal in our state. Said I'd need it. I knew then this was just the beginning. Sierra wasn't going to give up easily. She'd rather destroy everything than admit she was wrong. But I looked back at Eli, peacefully coloring at our table, and knew I'd fight. He deserved better than her. He deserved a real family, and I was going to make sure he got one. The next morning, I woke up to 27 missed calls, all from Sierra. My phone screen glowed accusingly in the dim morning light, each notification a reminder of the storm I'd unleashed. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I already knew what they'd say. Threats, manipulation, fake tears, and promises she'd never keep. The same toxic cocktail she'd been serving for years. Caleb made pancakes while Eli watched cartoons, his small body curled up on our couch like he belonged there. The smell of butter and syrup filled our kitchen, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Eli giggled at something on TV and Caleb hummed while he cooked. For about an hour, I let myself believe this could work. Then the doorbell rang. It was Sierra's brother Derek, wearing his fancy lawyer suit that probably cost more than our mortgage payment. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his smile was sharp as a blade. He handed me an envelope with theatrical formality and said I'd been served. The paper felt heavy in my hands, like it was made of lead instead of trees. I opened it right there on my doorstep. my fingers trembling slightly. Custody petition. Emergency hearing scheduled for next week. The legal language swam before my eyes, but the meaning was crystal clear. Derek smirked and said Sierra had hired him to get her son back, said I didn't stand a chance against a real lawyer, said blood was thicker than water and judges always side with biological mothers. I slammed the door in his face hard enough to rattle the windows. I spent the rest of the day calling lawyers, my fingers cramping from dialing so many numbers. Most wanted $5,000 just to start speaking in smooth professional voices that turned cold when I mentioned payment plans. We had maybe $2,000 in savings after the ruined honeymoon we'd had to cancel when Eli came to stay. I found one guy named Miles who'd take payments. He sounded young but eager, his voice cracking slightly when he talked about fighting for children's rights. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown while Caleb watched Eli at the park. Miles looked even younger in person, maybe fresh out of law school with an ill-fitting suit and an earnest expression. His briefcase was new, the leather still stiff. But he listened carefully and took detailed notes in surprisingly neat handwriting. He said we had a good case, but warned me Derek was known for playing dirty, said to expect surprises in court, things that would make me angry, things that weren't true but sounded believable. I asked what kind of surprises. He just shook his head and said to document everything. Every text, every call, every interaction. That night, Eli had nightmares that shook the whole house. He kept crying for his mom, then pushing me away when I tried to comfort him, his small fists batting at my hands. It broke my heart into a million pieces. The kid was so confused, caught between loving his mother and knowing she'd left him. In the morning he apologized for being bad, his voice so small I could barely hear it. His eyes were puffy from crying, and he wouldn't meet my gaze. I told him he wasn't bad, just scared, and that was okay. He asked if Mommy was mad at him, twisting his dinosaur pajama top in his tiny hands. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that his mom is a selfish disaster who chose Vegas over him? You don't. You just hug him and make breakfast scrambled eggs with cheese just how he likes them. The week flew by in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I took time off work to prepare for court, using vacation days I'd been saving for something happier. Miles had me write down everything I could remember about Sierra's parenting. The missed pickups where Eli waited at preschool until the teachers called me. The forgotten birthdays where I'd rushed out to buy cakes and presents so he wouldn't know his mom forgot. The times she'd shown up hammered, stumbling and slurring while Eli hid behind my legs. It filled 12 pages of careful documentation, each incident dated and detailed. Caleb took photos of Eli's room at our house versus his room at Sierra's. Ours had books and toys and clean sheets, walls covered in his artwork that we'd framed like museum pieces. Hers had a bare mattress and empty beer cans, cigarette burns in the carpet, and windows so dirty you couldn't see through them. We thought we were ready. We weren't even close. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best dress, a navy blue one I'd worn to job interviews. Professional but not severe. Caleb wore his only suit, the one from our wedding, now a bit tight around the middle. We dropped Eli at my friend Tessa's house, a cheerful place that smelled like fresh cookies and had 3 dogs for him to play with. He clung to me at the door, his fingers twisted in my dress, begging not to go back to Mommy's house. His fear was a living thing, radiating from his small body. I promised him everything would be okay, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. I hoped I wasn't lying. The courthouse was old and intimidating, all marble and dark wood, designed to make regular people feel small. Miles met us outside, looking nervous and adjusting his tie repeatedly. He said Grant had filed additional documents that morning, thick manila folders that made my stomach drop. He wouldn't say what was in them, just told us to stay calm no matter what happened, to let him do the talking. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more like a conference room than the grand halls of justice from TV. It smelled like old paper and floor polish. Sierra sat at the other table, wearing a conservative dress I'd never seen before, probably borrowed from someone with better sense. Her hair was neat, pulled back in a modest bun. Makeup is subtle and maternal. She looked like a different person, like someone had dressed up as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Grant sat beside her in an expensive suit that screamed success and reliability. The judge was an older woman with gray hair pulled back severely and tired eyes that had seen too many family disasters. She read through the papers while we waited, occasionally making notes with a gold pen. The silence was suffocating. Finally, she looked up over her reading glasses and asked Grant to present his case. Grant stood and launched into a speech about a loving mother being denied her child, his voice rich with false sympathy. He painted Sierra as a struggling single mom who'd made one mistake, overwhelmed by the pressures of modern parenthood. Said she'd been exhausted and asked her sister for help. A moment of vulnerability twisted into abandonment. Said I'd agreed to babysit for a few days, then refused to return Eli, turning a family favor into a kidnapping. The judge took notes, her expression unreadable. Then Grant dropped the bomb. He submitted documents showing I'd been treated for depression 5 years ago after a bad breakup. Said I was mentally unstable, prone to erratic behavior, unfit to care for a child. The papers made a soft thud as they hit the judge's desk. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands going cold. How did he even get those records? They were supposed to be confidential. Miles objected immediately, saying the records were irrelevant and obtained through improper channels, his voice rising with indignation. The judge said she'd review them for relevance but would need to verify their authenticity, adding them to her growing pile of evidence. Grant continued, presenting character statements from 3 of Sierra's friends, women I recognized as her drinking buddies, all saying what a devoted mother she was, how she lived for Eli. All lies wrapped in legal language, but they sounded convincing, professionally written. Then he called Sierra to testify. She walked to the stand slowly, playing up the grieving mother angle. She cried on cue, talking about how much she missed her baby, how empty her arms felt without him, how I'd always been jealous of her. Jealous that she had a child. Jealous of her freedom. Jealous of everything. Said I'd turned Eli against her with lies and bribes. She was good, really good. If I didn't know better, I'd almost believe her myself. Her tears looked real, her voice cracked at just the right moments. When Miles's turn came, he presented our evidence methodically. The photos, the documentation, the frantic calls to hospitals when Sierra disappeared. He had me testify about finding Eli alone, describing the terror in his eyes when I found him, about the pyramid of cereal bowls and empty fridge, about him saying he was being a big boy and taking care of himself, about Sierra laughing from Vegas, the sound of slot machines in the background while her son sat hungry and alone. The judge seemed interested but not convinced, tapping her pen thoughtfully. She asked why I hadn't called child services immediately when Sierra first started leaving Eli with me so often. I explained that I was trying to help my sister, trying to keep the family together, trying to protect Eli from the system. She nodded, but I could tell it wasn't enough. My explanation sounded weak even to my own ears. Then Miles called his witness Ramona, the social worker who'd responded to the wellness check. She testified about finding Eli alone and scared, how he'd been too frightened to open the door at first, about the condition of Sierra's house, the overflowing trash, the empty beer bottles, and the lack of food suitable for a child. About Eli saying this wasn't the first time Mommy left him alone, that he knew how to use the microwave and where the cereal was kept. Grant objected repeatedly, claiming hearsay and bias, but Ramona held firm. She'd been doing this for 20 years. She knew neglect when she saw it, and she'd seen plenty. The judge listened carefully, making extensive notes. When Ramona finished, things felt more balanced, but I could see Sierra whispering urgently to Grant, her facade cracking. They had something else planned. Grant stood for his closing argument, straightening his tie like an actor preparing for his big scene. He acknowledged Sierra had made mistakes but said she deserves another chance, that everyone deserves redemption. Then he dropped another bomb. He claimed I'd been giving Eli alcohol, letting him sip beer at family gatherings. Said a neighbor had seen it happen multiple times. I nearly jumped out of my chair, my whole body going rigid with shock. Miles grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in, reminding me to stay calm. The judge asked for evidence, her eyebrows raised skeptically. Grant said the witness was outside, ready to testify. The judge considered for a moment, then allowed it. In walked Sierra's neighbor, an older man named Harold who reeked of cigarette smoke. I recognized him vaguely. He lived 2 houses down from Sierra and always seemed to be watching from his window. He testified that he'd seen me give Eli beer at a barbecue in Sierra's backyard. Said the boy was stumbling around hammered while I laughed. It was complete fiction. We'd never even had a barbecue at Sierra's house. I avoided going there whenever possible. Miles cross-examined him hard, his young voice gaining strength. Asked for dates, times, details, what kind of beer, what was Eli wearing, who else was there. Harold fumbled with his answers, contradicting himself, sweating under the fluorescent lights. It was obvious he was lying. But the damage was done. The judge looked concerned, doubt creeping into her expression. She said she needed time to review everything and granted Sierra temporary custody until the next hearing in 2 weeks. I felt my world collapse, the floor seeming to tilt beneath my feet. Miles tried to argue, but the judge had decided. Her gavel came down with finality. Eli would go home with Sierra that day. We had 2 hours to pack his things and drop him off. I spent those 2 hours crying ugly sobs that shook my whole body. Caleb packed while I held Eli, memorizing the weight of him, the smell of his hair. He kept asking why he had to go, his voice getting smaller with each question. I couldn't give him a real answer, I just kept saying it was only for a little while. The lie burning my throat. When we pulled up to Sierra's house, she was waiting outside, still in her court dress but smoking a cigarette. The maternal facade is already crumbling. She flicked it away as we approached, the butt still smoldering on her dead lawn. Eli death gripped my hand, his whole body trembling. I knelt down and promised I'd see him soon. Told him to be brave, to remember that we loved him. He nodded, but tears were streaming down his face, leaving clean tracks through the dirt on his cheeks. Sierra grabbed his hand roughly and yanked him toward the house, her nails digging into his small wrist. Didn't even let him say goodbye to Caleb. As they reached the door, she turned back with a nasty smile, the real Sierra finally showing through. "You ought to know not to mess with me," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Then they were gone, the door slamming shut like a prison cell. I sat in the car and sobbed while Caleb rubbed my back. Caleb drove home in silence, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. The house felt empty without Eli, like all the air had been sucked out. His coloring books were still on the table, open to a half-finished picture of a rainbow. His favorite stuffed dinosaur on the guest bed, one eye missing from too much love. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just kept replaying the hearing in my head. How had I gone so wrong? How had lies won over truth? 3 days later, I drove by Sierra's house just to check. I parked across the street, feeling like a stalker but not caring. Her car wasn't there, but I could see Eli in the window, his small face pressed against the glass. He looked okay, sad, but okay. No visible bruises. I wanted to knock, to hug him, to take him home where he belonged, but I knew that would make things worse and would give Grant more ammunition. I drove away feeling helpless, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, Miles called. He'd been investigating Harold's testimony, working late hours for free because he believed in our case. Harold owed Sierra a lot of money. Gambling debts from her ex-boyfriend's poker games, IOUs that went back years. We had our leverage. Miles said to be patient, to trust the system, said things would turn around at the next hearing. I wanted to believe him. A week passed with no word. I texted Sierra asking about Eli, keeping my messages neutral and polite. No response. I called Child Services for updates and they said the case was progressing. Bureaucratic speak for nothing, whatever that means. Caleb tried to keep me distracted, but I was a mess. Couldn't focus at work. Snapped at everyone. Forgot important meetings. My boss gave me a warning and said I needed to get it together. I didn't care about the job, all I cared about was getting Eli back. Then everything changed. It was midnight when the doorbell rang, the sound cutting through the quiet house like a scream. Caleb grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, thinking it was a burglar or something. But when I opened the door, there was Eli alone in his pajamas with a black eye that made my blood run cold. I pulled him inside immediately, scooping him into my arms. He was shivering and crying, his whole body shaking with sobs. His pajamas were dirty and too small, like he'd been wearing them for days. I wrapped him in a blanket while Caleb locked the door, checking the street for any sign of Sierra. When I asked what happened, Eli could barely speak through his tears. His words came out in hiccups and gasps. Finally, he managed to tell us. Mommy's new friend Logan had hit him. Said he was being too loud watching TV. Sierra had told him to stop crying, or Logan would hit him again. So he'd waited until they were asleep, listening to their snores, and snuck out the back door. Walked 8 blocks in the dark to our house, navigating by memory and streetlights. 4 years old. 8 blocks. Alone. In the middle of the night. My hands shook as I examined his eyes. It was swollen, almost shut, purple and angry. Caleb took photos while I held Eli. Evidence, captured in harsh kitchen light. We needed evidence. We needed proof that couldn't be denied. I called 911, my voice surprisingly steady. Told them about the assault and that Eli had fled to our house for safety. They sent an officer and an ambulance, sirens cutting through the night. The EMTs checked Eli over with gentle hands, documenting every bruise with clinical precision. There were more than just the eye finger marks on his arms where someone had grabbed him, a bruise on his back shaped like a boot print. They said none needed immediate hospital care but recommended we follow up with his pediatrician first thing in the morning. The officer took our statements and photos, his face grim. Said they'd investigate immediately, that crimes against children were top priority. I asked if Eli could stay with us. He said, given the circumstances, yes, at least until Child Services reviewed the case in the morning. We put Eli back in the guest room this time. I stayed with him until he fell asleep, sitting on the floor beside his bed. He held my hand so tight it hurt, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. In the morning, I called Miles before Sierra even woke up. He said to document everything and file an emergency custody petition immediately. Said the black eye changed everything. Physical abuse was a line no judge could ignore. We spent the morning at his office filling out paperwork while Eli colored quietly in the corner, flinching whenever someone walked by too fast. It unalived me to see him so scared. So different from the giggling boy who'd watched cartoons just days before. By noon, Sierra had discovered Eli was gone. She called me screaming, her voice so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Said I'd kidnapped him again. Said she'd have me arrested for interference with custody. I told her about the black eye, about Logan, and hung up. She called back 20 times in 10 minutes. I didn't answer. Then she showed up at our house with Logan, their car screeching into our driveway. Caleb met them at the door while I kept Eli in the back room, holding him while he shook. I could hear Sierra screaming about her rights, about how we'd pay for this. Logan was yelling too, calling us names. I won't repeat threats that made my skin crawl. Caleb stayed calm. Told them to leave or he'd call the police. They didn't leave. Caleb called the police. The same officer from the night before showed up, already familiar with the situation. He recognized Logan immediately, his face hardening. Turns out Logan had a record: assault, substance possession, DUI, domestic violence. The officer told them both to leave and not come back. Said if they tried to take Eli, they'd be arrested for child endangerment. Sierra went ballistic and started throwing things from her purse at our house: lipstick, keys, even her phone, which shattered on the concrete. The officer had enough. He cuffed her for disorderly conduct, the metal clicking with finality. Logan tried to intervene and got cuffed too, shouting about police brutality. As they were loaded into the patrol car, Sierra screamed that this wasn't over, that she'd destroy me, ruin my life, take everything I loved. I believed her. But I didn't care. Eli was safe. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. Miles said we had a strong case now of physical abuse, documented by professionals. Criminal records, the midnight escape that showed Eli's desperation. But he warned me they'd come out swinging. Sure enough, the next day, Grant filed countercharges. Claimed I'd coached Eli to lie about the abuse. Said I'd caused the bruises myself to frame Logan. That I was that desperate to keep Eli. Even alleged I'd planted substances in Sierra's house during previous visits. It was insane. But I knew some judges might consider it. Miles told me not to worry. Said Grant was desperate, throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. But I was worried. Sierra had already proven she'd lie about anything, and Grant knew how to make lies sound like truth. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking on Eli every hour, making sure he was still there, still safe, still breathing. Caleb tried to reassure me, but I could see he was worried about the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking the locks. We'd already lost once. What if we lost again? What if the judge believed Grant's lies? What if Eli had to go back to that house with Logan? I made myself sick thinking about it, running to the bathroom twice. In the morning, I threw up twice more before we even left for court. But I put on my brave face for Eli. Told him everything would be okay. Prayed I was right. This time, we were ready for Grant's tricks. Miles had spent days preparing, barely sleeping. He'd interviewed neighbors who'd seen Sierra's neglect, people who'd wondered why Eli was always at our house. Found records of missed doctor appointments, immunizations Eli had almost missed if I hadn't taken him. Even got Logan's ex-girlfriend to write a statement about his violence, about the reason she'd fled with their daughter. We had a solid case, built on facts, not fiction. But when we walked into the courtroom, I saw Sierra's secret weapon. Her mother. My mother. Sitting right behind her, glaring at me with familiar disappointment. I hadn't seen her in 2 years, not since she'd taken Sierra's side in our last fight, choosing her golden child over truth. Now she was here to support the daughter who'd abandoned her grandson. Of course she was. The judge was different this time. A younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, checking his watch repeatedly. He rushed through the preliminaries and asked Grant to present. Grant stood and immediately went on the attack. Said I was a vindictive sister who'd always resented Sierra's motherhood. Said I'd manipulated a confused child into telling lies for attention. He presented affidavits from Sierra and Logan denying any abuse, notarized lies on official paper. Then he called our mother to testify. She took the stand and lied through her teeth with practiced ease. Said I'd always been unstable, jealous, difficult. Said she'd seen me drinking heavily around Eli at family gatherings that never happened. Said Sierra was a wonderful mother who just needed support, not judgment. Every word was a knife in my back. Each lie cuts deeper than the last. Miles cross-examined her hard, his youth falling away as he found his courtroom voice. Asked why she hadn't seen Eli in 6 months if Sierra was such a good mother. Asked why she'd never called child services if she thought I was drinking around him. Asked why there were no photos of her with Eli from the past year. She fumbled for answers, contradicting herself repeatedly. Her story fell apart, but the damage was done. Our own mother had testified against me. The judge looked troubled, making notes. Then Miles presented our evidence. The photos of Eli's bruises, each one documented and dated. The police reports, written in official language that couldn't be disputed. The record of Logan's violence, stretching back years. He called the EMT who'd examined Eli. The man testified clearly about the injuries, saying they were consistent with abuse, not accidents. Grant objected repeatedly, but the EMT was a professional. His testimony carried weight that lies couldn't match. Then came the moment I dreaded. Eli had to testify. The judge cleared the courtroom of everyone except essential parties, making it less intimidating. Eli sat in a special chair, clutching his dinosaur, looking so small. The judge asked him gentle questions about what happened, his voice soft and patient. Eli told the truth in the simple, honest way only children can. Said Logan hit him when he spilled juice on the carpet. Said Mommy told him not to cry or it would be worse. Said he was scared and ran to Aunt Claire's house because that's where he felt safe. He was so brave, so honest. Even Grant couldn't shake his testimony and couldn't make a 4-year-old sound like a liar. When it was over, Eli ran to me. The judge allowed it. Let him sit on my lap for the rest of the hearing, a small kindness that meant everything. Miles's closing argument was passionate. He talked about a little boy who'd been failed by his mother repeatedly, who'd been left alone, neglected, and finally abused, who'd found safety with his aunt and uncle, only to be dragged back into danger. He asked the judge to protect Eli and not enable his abuser, to see through the lies to the truth, written in bruises on a child's body. Grant's closing was all emotion and manipulation. He talked about a mother's love and second chances, said foster care statistics proved children did better with biological parents, quoted studies and percentages. It might have worked. If Eli hadn't been sitting right there, with a black eye. The evidence was impossible to ignore. The judge deliberated for an hour, the longest hour of my life. Eli fell asleep in my arms while we waited, trusting me to keep him safe. Finally, the judge returned. He granted us temporary custody, with a clear path to permanent adoption if Sierra didn't comply with requirements. Said Sierra could have supervised visitation only 1 hour a week at a county facility. Required her to take parenting classes and undergo psychological evaluation. Logan was banned from any contact with Eli and a restraining order to be issued immediately. Sierra exploded, started screaming about her rights, about corruption, about me poisoning her son against her. The judge threatened contempt charges, his patience exhausted. Grant managed to calm her down and get her out of the courtroom, practically dragging her. As they left, she shot me a look of pure hatred, the kind that promised this wasn't over. I knew she'd be back, she'd appeal, she'd lie, she'd manipulate. But for now, Eli was safe. He was ours. That's all that mattered. I held him tighter and let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. The drive home from court felt surreal. Eli was officially ours, at least temporarily. He sat in his booster seat, humming some song from a cartoon like the whole nightmare hadn't happened. Caleb kept glancing at me with this relieved smile. I couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Sierra's car following us. But the road stayed clear. We stopped for ice cream on the way home. Eli got chocolate with sprinkles, and it dripped all over his shirt. He laughed for the first time in days. That sound was worth more than anything. That night we had a little celebration with just the three of us. Pizza and Eli's favorite movie about talking cars. He fell asleep between us on the couch, one hand clutching Caleb's shirt, the other holding mine. We carried him to bed together, tucking him in with extra care. I must have checked on him 10 times that night, each time finding him safe and sound, spread out like a starfish with his dinosaur. The next morning, Miles called with bad news. Sierra had already filed an appeal. Grant was claiming judicial bias and procedural errors. Said the judge rushed the decision without considering all evidence. Miles said not to worry, that appeals rarely worked in these cases, but I could hear the concern in his voice. Grant was good at finding loopholes. We'd won a battle, but the war wasn't over. 2 days later, things got worse. I was at work when my boss, Douglas, called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable and wouldn't meet my eyes. Said he'd received a call from someone claiming I was under investigation for child abuse, that I was mentally unstable and dangerous. He didn't believe it, but corporate policy required him to place me on administrative leave pending investigation. I knew immediately it was Sierra, or Grant, probably both. They were trying to destroy my credibility before the appeal. Caleb found a threatening note on his car that same day, cut out magazine letters like some bad movie. It said we'd regret stealing Eli, that we'd pay for ruining Sierra's life. We took it to the police, but they said without proof it was from Sierra they couldn't do much, just added it to the file. The officer suggested we get security cameras. We installed them that weekend, covering every angle of our property. The supervised visitation started the next week. I had to drop Eli at the county facility every Saturday. He cried the whole drive there, begging not to go. The supervisor was a nice woman named Monica who'd seen it all. She promised to keep him safe. The visits were only an hour but felt like forever. I'd sit in the parking lot the whole time watching the clock. When Eli came out, he'd run to me like he'd been gone for days. Sierra used those visits to mess with his head, told him I was keeping him prisoner, that she was fighting to save him, that soon he'd come home and everything would be better. The supervisor documented everything, but the damage was done. Eli started having nightmares again, wetting the bed, asking if he was bad for not wanting to live with mommy. We got him into therapy with a child psychologist named Dr. Lena. She was amazing with him, using play therapy to help him process everything. 3 weeks after the hearing, our security cameras caught something interesting: Logan sneaking around our house at 2 a.m., trying car doors and checking windows. He was clearly hammered, stumbling and cursing. The footage was crystal clear. We called the police immediately. They arrested him for attempted burglary and violating the restraining order. Turns out he had meth in his pocket too. He was looking at serious jail time. Sierra went ballistic when Logan got arrested, called me screaming that I'd set him up. Said I'd planted the substances just like she'd accused me of before. I recorded the whole call. Every unhinged word. Miles said it was gold for our case and showed her true colors. She was spiraling. Without Logan, her muscle and substance connection gone. The next supervised visit, she showed up high, pupils dilated, jaw clenching, talking too fast. Monica documented everything and called it off after 20 minutes. That's when things escalated. I was grocery shopping with Eli when I noticed my car making weird noises. Something felt off with the steering. We made it home, but I called our mechanic friend Marco to check it out. He found the problem immediately. Someone had loosened the lug nuts on my front tire. A few more miles, and the wheel would have come off. Could have unalived us both. Marco said it looked deliberate, not wear and tear. We filed another police report. Caleb was furious. Wanted to confront Sierra directly. I had to physically stop him from driving to her house. We couldn't give her any ammunition for the appeal. Had to play it smart. Miles advised us to hire a private investigator, said we needed to build an airtight case for permanent custody. The PI was expensive, but Caleb's parents helped. They'd grown to love Eli like their own grandchild. The PI's name was Garrett. Different Garrett, not the lying neighbor. Former cop who knew how to dig up dirt legally. Within a week, he had interesting information. Sierra had been collecting disability benefits for Eli. Claimed he had severe autism that required constant care. But she'd been pocketing the money instead of getting him therapy, never took him to any appointments. The fraud went back 2 years. Thousands of dollars stolen from a program meant to help kids. We also learned about Logan's mechanic friend. A guy named Trent, who'd been seen near our house the night before my car trouble. The same Trent who'd done time for insurance fraud involving staged accidents. The pieces were falling into place. Garrett kept digging while we prepared for the appeal hearing. He was worth every penny, finding things we never could have discovered ourselves. Meanwhile, Eli was thriving. Despite everything, his bruises healed and his confidence grew. He made friends at the park, learned to ride a bike with training wheels, and started reading simple books. Every milestone felt like a victory. Caleb taught him to play catch in the backyard. I read him stories every night, doing all the voices until he giggled. We were becoming a real family. The appeal hearing was set for 6 weeks after the original decision. Miles had us prepare even more thoroughly. We had Eli's therapist ready to testify about his progress with us versus his trauma responses to Sierra. Had the supervisor's reports from the disastrous visits. Had the arrest records, the security footage, the mechanic's statement about my sabotaged car. But Grant had tricks too. A week before the hearing, Sierra's neighbor Ramona, not the social worker, contacted Miles. Said Sierra had approached her about lying in court. Offered her $500 to say she'd seen me giving Eli alcohol. Ramona was a recovering alcoholic who'd worked hard to rebuild her life. She was offended by the offer and wanted to help us. Said she'd testify about Sierra's real parenting, the parties, the men coming and going, the times she'd heard Eli crying alone. Then Garrett hit the jackpot. Found out Sierra had done this before, not with a kid, but with her ex-boyfriend's dog. Claimed he'd abused it to get custody in their breakup, then sold it a week later. The pattern was clear. She used custody as a weapon, not because she actually wanted responsibility. We had the receipts, the testimony from the ex, even the ad where she'd sold the dog. 3 days before the appeal, Grant tried one last dirty trick. He filed a motion claiming I'd been coaching Eli to lie. Said he had proof. The proof was a heavily edited audio recording of me talking to Eli about the court. Made it sound like I was telling him what to say. But we had the full recording from our security system. Showed Grant's version was chopped up and rearranged. Miles filed charges for evidence tampering. The night before the appeal, I couldn't eat. Keep running through everything that could go wrong. What if the judge believed Grant's lies? What if they gave Eli back to Sierra? Caleb held me while I cried, promising everything would work out. Eli must have sensed our stress because he crawled into our bed around midnight. We all slept huddled together, like circling the wagons against danger. The appeal hearing was in a bigger courtroom, more formal, more intimidating. The judge was an older man with kind eyes but a stern expression. He'd clearly reviewed everything thoroughly, asking specific questions about details from months ago. Grant came out swinging but seemed off his game, kept shuffling papers and repeating himself. Found out later he was being investigated by the Bar Association for his evidence tampering. When Garrett testified about the disability fraud, Sierra's face went white. She hadn't known we knew. The judge asked her directly about the benefits. She stammered and looked at Grant, who objected on grounds of relevance, but fraud involving the child was definitely relevant. The judge overruled him and demanded an answer. Sierra tried to lie, but Garrett had documents, check stubs, bank records, forged therapy notes. It was over. Then Ramona testified about Sierra's attempt to bribe her produce text messages where Sierra offered money for false testimony. The judge's face got darker with every revelation. When Dr. Lena testified about Eli's trauma and recovery, several people in the gallery teared up. She explained how he'd gone from a scared, withdrawn child to a happy, thriving boy, all because he finally felt safe. Grant's closing argument was desperate. He attacked everyone's credibility, claimed conspiracy, even suggested judicial corruption. It was painful to watch. Miles's closing was simple and powerful. He laid out the pattern of abuse, neglect, fraud, and manipulation. Asked the judge to protect Eli from a mother who saw him as a paycheck and a weapon, not a child. The judge didn't need long to decide. He terminated Sierra's parental rights completely. Cited the fraud, the bribery attempts, the child endangerment, the false accusations. Said she'd shown a pattern of behavior that made her unfit to parent. Ordered her to pay back the fraudulent benefits and face criminal charges. Approved our petition to adopt Eli officially. Even waived the usual waiting periods given the circumstances. We'd won, really won, permanently. Sierra didn't scream this time, just stared at me with dead eyes while Grant packed up his briefcase. As she walked past our table, she leaned down and whispered that she'd make me pay someday. Security moved her along before she could say more. I didn't care about her threats anymore. Eli was safe, that's all that mattered. The adoption was finalized 2 months later. Same courthouse, but a different feeling entirely. Eli wore a little suit and tie, grinning the whole time. When the judge declared him officially our son, he jumped into our arms yelling, "I have a real family now." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the bailiff was sniffling. Mom left me on my 10th birthday, vanished without a note. Years later, she came back asking about the $100,000 settlement, so I exposed her in court. Hello everyone, my name is Luca. I am 23 years old and currently living in Bakersfield, California. I own Aunt Patty's Pie, a little bakery where I bake pies every day with the lovely perfume of memories I once tried to forget but could never truly forget. My story began when I was only 9 years old. Before my parents divorced, I had the life that most children dream about. I grew up in a house full of laughter, movie nights with the entire family, and my mother's soothing hand on my head as I finished schoolwork. But then a storm struck our small household, and everything changed. I used to imagine that after the divorce, Mom would be my safe haven because Dad was no longer present. But deciding to stay with her started a chapter I never dreamed I'd have to go through. A few months later, Mom began seeing a new man, Mason, who I could never accept. He was around a lot, and as a result, Mom Dahlia started coming home late and neglecting me. Every time Mason walked through the door, everything inside me tightened. Couldn't take it. I behaved out by remaining silent at times and talking back at others, which enraged Mom. After witnessing me push back repeatedly, she snapped one day about a month later and exclaimed frustratedly, "Luca, you need to learn to accept this." Hearing those words made my throat clench. I felt like I was losing the only person I could rely on. I had always assumed that Mom would love me no matter what, but I had no idea that her love for me would one day feel more like a duty than anything genuine. 2 months later, on my 10th birthday, I lost her totally. I recall that morning so well. Mom stepped into my room with a modest present box. When she noticed me still laying in bed, she gave me a rare smile and said softly, "Get ready. We're going on a little trip for a few days." My heart rate increased. For a brief moment, a ray of hope appeared within me. This journey may bring us closer again. I hastened to gather my belongings, making sure not to forget my plastic robot, a 9th birthday present from my father, Grant. That afternoon, Mom drove me to a tiny home in Central California. When we arrived, Aunt Patty, my late grandmother's younger sister, greeted us. Aunt Patty looked surprised when we arrived at her door and asked, "Dahlia, why didn't you call first?" Mom smiled and replied, "We're just here to relax for a few days. Luca wanted to experience a little country air." Aunt Patty nodded warmly and agreed. That night, Mom held me while we slept on Aunt Patty's sofa. I could feel the warmth of her arms around me, and at that moment I was convinced she still loved me. I fell asleep in the comfort that I hadn't felt in months when her partner entered her life. What I didn't realize at the time was that it would be the final time I was held by her. When I awoke the next morning, the house was strangely silent. The only sound was the slow, constant whir of the ceiling fan above me, like the heartbeat of a silent house. Seconds later, I sat up, scouring the room for Mom. I dashed into the kitchen, then out to the porch, yelling her name aloud, but there was no response. After about 15 minutes of looking, I returned inside, curled up on the sofa, and clutched my plastic robot, my sole remaining companion. 1 hour passed, then 2. I remained waiting, eyes locked on the door, hoping she had simply stepped out for a moment and would return shortly. As I sat there, petrified with horror, the front door flung open. I leaped to my feet, hoping and praying it was her, but as I saw Aunt Patty enter the living room, my heart fell. There was no trace of my mother. Aunt Patty's voice quivered as she inquired, "Luca, where's your mother?" I froze. A searing agony went throughout my chest. Mom was entirely gone. She hadn't left any note, not even a goodbye. She only left behind the promise of a trip to the countryside, fields and goats. A trip that was never intended to draw us closer, but rather to leave me behind. I never expected that the thing I was so excited about would end up changing my childhood forever. And that's when I discovered the sad truth. My mother had abandoned me on my 10th birthday, and it was the most devastating gift she had ever given. Aunt Patty sat beside me after realizing my mother had left, her eyes filled with concern as she tried to keep her words quiet. She grasped my hand and whispered, "Luca, your mom will come back. Don't worry." Then she hurried to the landline and dialed my mother's number repeatedly, but we just got that unending hollow ring. And I, a 10-year-old kid, had no idea what to do but cry my heart out. The fear was so intense that it felt like it was crushing my small chest. Aunt Patty kindly took me into an embrace after seeing my emotions. Even as she embraced me, I could sense helplessness in her eyes. There we were, two strangers brought together by a decision neither of us had requested. That first week, I spent every day sitting at the window, eyes locked on the dirt road outside, waiting for Mom to return. Those first few nights at Aunt Patty's, I was tortured by memories. Every time I closed my eyes, I was transported back to the custody hearing in the family court, when Mom was granted complete custody of me. I remembered how Mom and Dad sat silently. There were no disputes or shouting, only a thick, awful silence. I remembered the furious conflicts that had occurred during Dad's few visits home. He was a Marine and was always gone. When he eventually returned, he frequently yelled. In those hazy memories, I could still hear Mom's upset and frustrated voice yelling at him, claiming he never genuinely cared about us. That grief, that rawness, still resonated within me. I knew she felt abandoned, lonely, and worn down by his prolonged absence. As I grew older, my comprehension grew deeper. I sensed they were unhappy. Perhaps this is why she couldn't remain with him anymore. But the memories did not stop with the arguments. I also remembered the last time I saw Dad, the day he got in the car to return to base. He glanced at me and whispered, "Wait for me, Luca. I'll come back for you." The memory of that promise made my heart ache. I miss him. I miss the farewell hug he gave me in the courts, the look in his eyes that was filled with shame and grief for not being able to stay and keep our little family together. And when I thought about all of that, the tears would flow anew. All I had left was the plastic robot he gave me, a tiny sign of optimism, and a recall of a promise I still held on to. I felt trapped in a storm with no way out at the time, and I couldn't help but wonder if Dad's promise would ever be fulfilled. After a week of waiting for Mom and no sign of her return, Aunt Patty and I reluctantly accepted that she was not coming back for me. From that day forward, I lived in Aunt Patty's little house in Central California. It was a strange area for me, with low wooden fences and the incessant clatter of an ancient ceiling fan. Aunt Patty lived alone. She was forthright, and she never veiled her feelings toward children. One afternoon, in a flat, matter-of-fact manner, she looked at me and stated, "I live alone for a reason. I'm not cut out to raise anybody's kid." Hearing those words hit me hard. My heart sank, and I cried profusely that day. I knew I was not welcome. I realized I was nothing but a burden for her. Except even when confronted with a withdrawn little boy who did nothing except cry and clutch to a plastic robot, waiting day after day for a mother who would not return, Aunt Patty couldn't ignore me. A few days later, she decided to put her pie business on hold and drive me back to our old house to hunt for Mom. When I found out she was taking me, I felt that flicker of hope come back. I pictured seeing Mom and leaping into her arms, as I used to do after travels with Dad. But when we arrived, the house was completely shut up. Weeds have taken over the yard. The neighbors informed us that she had sold the house and gone away with her lover, leaving no contact information behind. When I heard that, a sudden, excruciating ache surged through my chest. Aunt Patty was enraged when she found my mother had abandoned me and purposefully placed me on her. Without saying anything, she drove me to the Child Services Center. But as we stopped at the front gate, she took my hand and said firmly, "Come on, you're going home with me." That sentence felt like the sun breaking through the darkest storms of my life. I nodded without hesitation, and she led me away through the bustling streets, complaining about being stuck with a kid like me. Honestly, I'm glad Aunt Patty changed her mind. I'm not sure where I would have ended up if she hadn't. After more than 2 weeks of living with Aunt Patty, I gradually adapted to the pace of life in Central California. I still waited for my mother every day, but my hope began to erode. My dreams about her stopped coming every night, and I began to realize that she was not coming back. Though hesitant at first, Aunt Patty gradually began to care for me in her own manner. Perhaps it was a pity for the child who had been left behind. When Mom baked, she would always keep the finest slice for me. Every morning she prepared a basic breakfast and barked, "Shoo, don't start smelling." As for me, the boy who had previously exclusively played with robots and toy cars, I gradually became accustomed to the dirt, grass, and filth of the countryside. Then one little occurrence occurred. Aunt Patty and I went to the market one morning. In her typically caustic tone, she replied, "Stick with me. Don't get lost." But as she was picking out flour for baking, I noticed someone who looked like my mother. My heart raced. I raced after the figure, crying, "Mom!" I maneuvered through the crowd, calling her name repeatedly, until the woman turned around and I realized it wasn't her. That was the moment I realized I'd lost Aunt Patty. Panic overcame me. I looked about but didn't know where I was. The familiar feeling of being abandoned returned, and my legs began to tremble. Nearly an hour later, I was sitting behind a dumpster behind the market. Aunt Patty had handed me a pastry earlier, not to eat but to hold on to. I simply sat there, frozen. Then, unexpectedly, I heard urgent footsteps. I looked up to see Aunt Patty. Her hair was a disaster. She was out of breath, and her eyes were filled with concern. She hurried up to me, knelt, and held me hard. Her voice trembled as she said, "Thought I lost you. Though I really lost you." At that moment I trembled not just from terror but also from the tremendous emotion of being actually cared for. It was the first time I felt something so intense from her. And in that instant, I realized these two strangers had transformed into something more. We were no longer separated. After nearly a month without hearing from my mother, I noticed Aunt Patty had gotten quieter. There was a worry in her eyes that she never spoke aloud. Then one day, Mom made a life-changing decision. She opted to formally adopt me. When Alma, my next-door neighbor, discovered that my mother had left me at Aunt Pat's, she stepped in to help. She produced the required documentation and gently walked her through the guardianship process. Thanks to Alma, once everything was completed and authorized, I was able to return to school, have regular checkups, and officially become a member of Aunt Pat's modest home. After everything they had done for me, something within me began to thaw. I no longer felt like an abandoned child. My second mother, Aunt Patty, was already in her 60s. She never said, "I love you." But her care, breakfast, and pies provided me with a sense of security that I had believed was lost forever. Alma, who later became my instructor, was always quietly present. Her presence in the school hallways, and the way her eyes supported me without saying anything, provided solace on the days when I missed my mother the most. She became my anchor, especially as the next storm in my life approached. Patty raised me with all the love she had learned as a first-time mother throughout the 5 years I lived with her. I was a stubborn teenage boy back then, and I occasionally irritated her, but she never slapped me, yelled at me, or threatened to leave. Whenever I apologized, her eyes softened. Then she'd bring me into her loving embrace and hug me like a true mother. I gradually adjusted to life in the rural core of Central California, having grown up in a metropolis with playgrounds and televisions. Patty would accompany me to the town market on weekends, where trays of fresh, fragrant pies were displayed. She taught me how to wrap them, how to meet guests, and, most importantly, how to appreciate every dime we made. In the evenings, beneath the dull yellow light, she'd tell me stories about her life, like why she chose to live alone, why she decided to bake, and even give her secret recipe, which she had never shared with anyone before. Her stories sank into me. They made me fall in love with baking, and gradually, I began to feel like I belonged there. But then, 5 years later, shortly after I turned 15 on a cold winter morning, Patty died softly and gently in her bed. I recall how sharp the cold was that year, as if it was piercing through my skin. But the true pain came from the sudden void she left behind. As I prepared for school that morning, I noticed her familiar brown shoes in the corner of the room. I entered her bedroom and noticed her lying still on the bed. I assumed she was sleeping in due to tiredness. But then, a concept struck me like a punch in the chest. In all those years, she had never slept after 5 a.m. She was constantly getting up and leaving the house before I opened my eyes. Fear gripped me as soon as I realized this. I called her name repeatedly, but she did not answer. I dashed to her side, shaking her and shouting out harder, but she didn't reply. Her face appeared calm, as if she were sleeping soundly. But she was gone forever, without a farewell. But the worry I felt then was not simply about losing her. It was based on the news I received after her death. 3 days after Patty was laid to rest, a Child Protective Services worker visited the house. The woman wore a thick coat, held a clipboard, and spoke softly but coldly. "Since there is currently no legal guardian listed, Luca will need to be placed in a youth care facility." When I heard that, it seemed like all the oxygen had been stolen from my lungs. At the time, I was too young to live alone. And under California law, I couldn't stay at Patty's residence without a legal guardian or an active custody order. Even though it was the only place I had ever known as home, my throat clenched as I realized there was nowhere else to turn. Alma was standing next to me when she began to cry. She consented to become my temporary guardian so that I could stay at Patty's house. In the days that followed, I lived alone in the small house Patty had left behind, relying on the modest resources she had accumulated over time. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me motivated to continue baking and keeping her spirit alive. After Grandma died, I began baking in my spare time, utilizing the recipes she left behind to earn a living while keeping her near to my heart. After months of trial and error, I succeeded in recreating her favorite flavor, warm, fragrant apple cinnamon. Alma took a little video of me writing "I miss you" on one of the pies while I was peacefully baking in the familiar kitchen. She later sent me the video with an encouraging message, and I used it to enter my first baking competition when I was 16. My pie garnered good marks from the judges, and even more unexpectedly, the video went viral online, touching the hearts of many. It was the first stepping stone that led me to a future profession. For a brief time after everything that had occurred, I envisaged a brighter future in which each pie connected me to Patty. But I never expected that moment to turn my life upside down again. After more than 2 years of living alone in Patty's little house, I eventually adapted to the sedate, regulated pace she had left behind. Alma's calm support helped me grow up. I learned to care for myself and live frugally with the money I earned from selling pastries at the weekend market. I learned to handle every dime by listening to the oven, as if it were my own life. Then one day in early July I received a letter from the city of Bakersfield with a notice of land reclamation. Patty's home was directly in the line of a planned federal highway expansion. By law, I had 60 days to answer, and if I accepted, I had up to 90 days to depart the premises. The government gave over $100,000 as compensation. When I received the notice, I held the letter for a long time, unsure whether to be delighted or unhappy. If I accepted, I'd get the money, but would lose Patty's home, the location I'd called home. The site is full of memories. My mother abandoned me, and this is where I was cherished and cared for. Alma, my temporary guardian, began assisting me with the paperwork to get the money and find a new place to live. We intended to start a separate account, set aside some funds for rent, and save the remainder for the future. However, just a few days after the initiative was publicized on the news, the woman who had previously abandoned me returned. Dahlia, my mother. That day, as I was packing to relocate, my mother unexpectedly appeared at the gate. She stood there in the midday sun, resting against the old wooden fence, her face exhausted and her eyes red and swollen as if she had just cried. When I stepped out onto the porch, she looked at me, trembling, and whispered, "Luca, it's me. I miss you." The moment I saw her, my entire body froze. Even if my recollections of her had faded with time, her voice and gaze remained imprinted on my consciousness. After all those years of being left behind, I was curious what I would do if she returned. I envisioned her apologizing, crying, or simply stopping over to see me for a bit before departing again. But when it happened, I felt neither happy nor upset. Instead, I felt empty inside. After what she had done to me, I didn't want to believe anything she said. But I didn't want to quarrel either. And part of me hoped that this time, she would try to make things right. Alma was in the hospital after having baby and couldn't help me deal with it. After much thought, I allowed my mother in. She remained temporarily in the living room. Dahlia acted kindly over the first few days. She recalled old memories and informed me that she had spent years looking for me but had never found me. Patty informed her that I had been sent to a children's center. She cried, held me, and said she cared. Her words jolted me. I had no idea whether what she said was true or false. But after years of wishing to be near my mother, I began to believe she had changed. But deep inside, I kept my guard up. Something about her seemed strange. In her words, and in her gaze, something was wrong. Several days later, things began to seem peculiar. She began criticizing my father, claiming he was irresponsible and abandoned me. Then she turned to Patty and accused her of being greedy and keeping me in control of the money. Dahlia gradually began asking questions about the land settlement, such as, did the money arrive yet? Whose name is on the account? Is the deed in Patty's or your name? I gave evasive responses, but within I got increasingly nervous. Then one late weekend afternoon, I returned home earlier than normal after selling pastries. I inadvertently overheard Dahlia on the phone in the kitchen. I froze in the hallway, listening to what she murmured. "He's not 18 yet. Don't worry. As soon as the money hits the account, I'll come right back to you." When I heard that, my heart felt like it erupted out of my chest. Our bond may be healed, and the lady who once abandoned me might still love me. But to her, I was nothing more than a name on an inheritance document. I hoped she'd come back for me. I assumed she regretted everything. I wanted to offer her an opportunity to make things right. I tried not to let the past turn me resentful. I promised myself that if someone sincerely apologized, I could forgive. But that was not the case. And after all the anguish she had caused, I was choked up. I felt my tears fall. I felt terrible for myself and was so hurt that I could not breathe. Around a minute later, I decided to confront her. When she saw me, she leaped, her eyes wide with fear. Before she could respond, I stepped forward. I didn't say anything. I simply bent down, grabbed her luggage and a few items she had on the table, opened the door, walked out to the yard and flung everything down the porch steps. Her belongings clattered on the cement in the fading light. Then I walked back in, grabbed her wrist and guided her to the door. As she came onto the porch, I let go, looked her in the eyes, and spoke each word in the calmest, most unambiguous voice I could manage. Get out. Dahlia burst into tears as she realized my commitment. She called me ungrateful and said I didn't love my mother, but I did not answer. At the time, I was only thinking about one thing: how to protect myself. I'd been living alone in that house since I was 15. I prepared for myself and made every dollar count. I learned to cope with loneliness and to set boundaries with those who hurt me. I contacted Alma right after Dahlia had left. A few days later, with Alma's support and the assistance of a community lawyer, I established a trust fund in my name. The settlement money was paid immediately into it and will be retained until I reach 18. I couldn't touch it right away, and no one else had access. When I was 18, I graduated from high school with good grades. When asked if I was going to college, I simply shook my head. Lecture halls and so-called steady employment on paper were not for me. I already knew my way, which smelt like cinnamon, was warmed by the hum of the oven, and crisped with the first piece of apple pie. Patty's former path. I went to Bakersfield with my previous compensation money, after covering rent and living expenses and contributing to the trust fund. I rented a modest area at the end of a street near the farmer's market and parking lot. My small bakery had no showy signage or modern decor, just a plain glass front and a few old wooden tables and chairs. Inside, I hung a picture of Patty and a hand-carved wooden placard that said, "Pies for the ones who stay." I named the store Aunt Patty's Pie. In the days that followed, I began selling pies baked using her secret recipe. First, a few interested customers came by. But then, owing to an old YouTube video Alma posted of 15-year-old me silently preparing pies, it resurfaced on Instagram and Facebook. People crowded in looking for the apple pie boy. Some days I had to get up at 3 a.m. to keep up with orders. And despite its size and simplicity, my small bakery was always busy. Some individuals drove nearly 2 hours for a slice of pie, hoping to enjoy the flavor of childhood that so many had complimented. Others brought their children, wanting them to experience the flavor of remembrance. In those moments, watching familiar customers savor each bite with satisfaction, I felt as if Patty was still here, beaming through every pie. Alma no longer served as my legal guardian in subsequent years. Instead, she became my spiritual guardian. She'd stop by the bakery on weekends, sit in her customary corner, read a book, and get the same thing: a slice of pecan pie with whipped cream and no sugar. We didn't say anything, just sat quietly, as if two people were clinging onto the memory of a woman who had never completely departed. 4 years later, when I reached 22, the bakery had grown well beyond my wildest expectations. From a modest little area with no signboard, it now has a website, regular customers, a YouTube channel with cooking videos, and a few viral films with hundreds of thousands of views. But that attention brought challenges I hadn't sought for. Every time a news story about a youngster who bakes using a deceased person's recipe appeared, a few strangers showed up. They claimed to be relatives or longtime family friends. Some insisted that I was their long-lost child. At first, I kept quiet, smiled, and let it go. But it eventually wore me down. I filmed a video for my channel one night after a long shift. In it, with a calm yet forceful voice, I said, "I have no parents. The person who raised me is gone. Please don't come here out of curiosity, or to take advantage, or to insert yourselves into stories you made up. This is my bakery. It's not a place for people to come looking for what they chose to throw away." After that, things settled down for a while until the afternoon. I was scrubbing the counter when I heard the faint chime of the doorbell. An older man walked inside. When he saw me, he said nothing except, "1 slice of apple pie, please, and a glass of water." I nodded, but something about that voice resonated deeply in my recollection. I couldn't identify it right first, but it seemed hauntingly familiar. When I brought out the pie, he was already seated at the table near the window. He remained quiet for a long time. No phone, no pictures of the food like the other customers, just a fork in his hand, staring out the window at the street. As I turned to return to the kitchen, he murmured softly, "Luca." Hearing my name shouted like that made me pause in my tracks. The way he said it caused my hands to shake. At that moment, I recognized the voice. I had heard the same voice during brief trips when he was on leave, the same voice that once said, "Wait for me, Luca. I'll come back for you." My legs felt wobbly as I walked back toward him. He cautiously took out an old, fading photo. The photo depicted a simple birthday party for a small boy in a red sweater embracing a silver robot tightly to his chest. That was me at 9 years old. And the robot? I still had it, stashed away in Patty's wooden box. I froze when I saw that photograph. I couldn't look up because I wasn't prepared to face what might happen next. A few seconds later, he stood up and softly grabbed my trembling arm. Then he spoke slowly. "It's me, Luca. I came back for you." Everything appeared to slow down as soon as those words fell. The world went silent. There were no oven sounds in the background, no customers, and no breeze outside the window. Just me and the man who once held me outside a courthouse and said, "Wait for me, Luca. I'll come back for you." After a few seconds, I looked up and caught his gaze, finally feeling peaceful. I saw tears and long-buried exhaustion, as well as a calm melancholy laced into every strand of gray hair. It wasn't the look of someone seeking forgiveness. It was the expression of someone hoping to recapture a small piece of the child he had once lost. After seeing that birthday photo from when I was 9, the vision of the man in uniform came flooding back. He was the one who showed me how to fold a blanket neatly. The one who lifted me onto his shoulders and sprinted across the backyard. The one who always stated, "You're the one thing I never want to lose." A minute later, we sat down at the table together. He began to talk in a deep, raspy tone, full of effort. He informed me that following the court verdict, all rights to me were taken away from him. He had left stillness and an unnamed emptiness in the background of his daily life. He once considered resisting it. Once nurtured the notion of recovering his status as my father. However, he sustained terrible injuries while on an overseas deployment. A bullet tore deep into his shoulder, keeping him in the hospital for over 2 years. Throughout that period, he lived on the precipice of consciousness and oblivion, the misery seeping into every restless, fragmented sleep. When he finally recovered, he was left with only his military jacket. Inside the pocket, there's a little notebook with faded corners. He had scribbled my birth date on one of those pages with a slightly slanted hand and faded blue ink. Rain and sweat had obscured the ink, but it was still visible. He glanced at that page for a long time before closing the notebook, as if searching for a passage through the desert. Carrying it with him, he started looking for me from scratch. Every day involved sifting through old memories, revisiting old places, looking up names in internet directories, and asking people who had previously worked with my mother. Then one day, while browsing a local news website, he came across a brief item about a handcrafted pie business in Bakersfield. The photograph depicted a business corner with an ancient wooden sign, a tray of steaming apple pies, and a black and white image of a woman standing next to an oven. Behind the counter, a young man rested his hand on a silver robot. At that moment, he didn't need confirmation. He knew it was me. And he came to find me. My throat dried up as I sat in the shop listening to my father speak. My eyesight was hazy, not from tears, but from all of my emotions colliding at once. Too much to express. After he finished, I moved closer to him. I threw my arms around that man, clinging on to the quiet that had existed between us for years. And for the first time since Patty had departed, I felt the warmth of another loving embrace. It wasn't loud, it was not staged. This was the truth. Standing peacefully between two guys, one a father, the other his kid. After my father returned with that old photo, I opened my heart. We gradually resumed chatting after 12 years, starting with that first hug. Initially, it was small talk and simple queries, similar to when I first started baking. The conversations gradually moved to old memories of family and childhood times that I thought I'd forgotten. My father had been a Marine. After being discharged and recovering from his injuries, he began working as a counselor at a veteran training center. That employment allowed him to maintain a regimented routine that was stable enough to support him while yet being flexible enough to reconnect with civilian life. Finding me was an important element of that life. We didn't talk every day, but he called every few days to see if I had time. Sometimes he dropped by the bakery near closing time, sat at the same window table and ordered his usual slice of apple pie. Some evenings he simply sat quietly. On other occasions he'd tell old stories, but he mostly listened to me. Aunt Patty's pie had grown far beyond its humble beginnings. It was no longer a one-person business with a few tables. I had leased the 2 adjacent premises, torn down the walls, and tripled the shop's size. I split the area into 3 sections, one for baking, one for service, and the remainder for clients to sit and relax in a nice cafe. I hired and educated personnel in Patty's identical style: bake gently, serve kindly, and treat every customer like family. The bakery began to develop a reputation. People came not only for the flavor, but also for the tale behind each pie. The story of an abandoned youngster who grew up in his gray-tinted kitchen and founded a shop in his mother's name. I did not market much, but word spread. One week, my double-layer lemon apple pie, a variant on Patty's original, became viral online. Customers queued up down the block. Some people pre-ordered a week in advance. The oven remains hot all day. Staff rotated shifts non-stop. I thought I'd discovered a stable existence. Work every day. My father comes every week. New regulars appear each month. I genuinely assumed I had progressed past the worst phases. But then I remembered that my life had never followed a straight line. My mother returned on a busy Saturday morning during the bakery's peak rush and found a lengthy queue of customers eager to try our newest pie. However, this time it was not about money. She came since she knew my father was present. That day, I was in the kitchen instructing the crew when I suddenly heard a tremendous boom on a table and a woman's voice saying, "Where are you, Luca? Come out here, I gave birth to you, you do not get to abandon me." When Dahlia saw my father sitting at the window, she marched right up to him and screamed, "Do you think you can steal him from me? He's my son. I gave birth to him." My father gently set down his fork. He stood up, squared his shoulders, and looked her directly in the eyes. Then, with a calm yet forceful tone, he said, "Dahlia, that's enough." Before she could speak again, he pointed at me and raised his voice. "Last time I was unable to defend my son, but this time I won't let you take another step." Dahlia laughed dryly and bitterly, sneering. She looked at me and exclaimed, "Who do you think you are, shutting me out? If I hadn't abandoned him back then, he wouldn't have any of this today." Her comments boomed across the large room, and one of my staff began recording the moment she walked in and began ranting. Ignoring my father's warning, Dahlia hit the table again, knocking over a plate of pies and spilling water on a customer's table. Some individuals stood up and stepped back in disbelief. The police arrived within minutes after her outburst. I contacted them as soon as I heard her scream. They restrained her as she kicked and yelled, repeating the same lines about how I was ungrateful and had betrayed the woman who gave me birth. But none of that mattered now. Her wrath resulted in her being forcibly removed and transported to the station. I walked up and stood behind my father as she was led out. Then, in a calm and clear tone, I looked her in the eyes and said, "You gave birth to me. But Patty showed me how to live." 1 week after the incident, I hired a lawyer and filed a civil complaint against Dahlia in Kern County Civil Court, where my bakery operates. I sued her for 3 reasons: public disruption, trespassing on private land, and child abandonment. Even though the abandonment occurred years ago, the bakery's video camera captured her claims, along with corroborating papers from Alma's care records and testimonies from my employees. The court accepted the case. During the hearing, the court determined that my mother was civilly liable for a total of $12,000 in damages, including $1,000 administrative fine for producing a public disturbance, $2,500 in compensation for property damage at the bakery, $5,000 for emotional suffering and loss of childhood. The plaintiff's legal fees and court costs total $3,500. In addition, the court granted a 5-year restraining order preventing Dahlia from coming within 200 feet of my home or employment. After that hearing, I didn't feel happy. I did not feel vindicated. But for the first time since Mom left me, I felt completely safe. I understood that pursuing legal action against my mother would elicit conflicting reactions. But for me, maintaining peace was the final and vital step in protecting myself. 6 months after my father found me, our relationship became quiet and tranquil. Not too loud. Not full of words. Just morning coffees with someone across the table, and calm evenings knowing someone would phone to tell me to get some sleep. Today, as I share this story with you, is also the day I honor Patti, who died when I was 15. This morning, I awoke earlier than usual, put a tray of lemon apple pies in the oven, and waited quietly, waiting for the aroma to fill the room. This is how I remember her. Not with tears, not with flowers, but with the things she had left behind. Today commemorates the 5th anniversary of Aunt Patti's pie. I did not hold a grand celebration. I just hung a little photo next to Patti's image, showing me at age 10, standing beside the first kitchen counter she ever gave me. After everything that has transpired, I do not seek vengeance. I don't require acknowledgement. Patti softly taught me to be compassionate, and I wish to live that way. In a world over which I have no control, I cling on to what is most important. A little kitchen, a familiar table, a bakery named after the woman who would never let go of me, and the one who remained. That is where my story ends. But I've got one question for you. What are your thoughts regarding my decision? Would you have done the same in my position? And do you believe my mother deserved the consequences she received? Share your opinions in the comments section below the story. And if this tale resonated with you, please subscribe to help support the channel. I will be back soon with more true stories from my life. See you at the next one.